Colleagues, I invite you to enjoy to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 77th day of the 106th Legislature first session. We're very pleased to welcome this morning as our pastor, Mr. Grant Hewitt, who happens to be the guest and the son-in-law of Senator Merman. Pastor Hewitt is a Southern Director for the Christian Medical and Dental Associations in Fort Worth, Texas. Please rise.
Our Lord God, creator of all things, we thank you for this privilege to speak to you, the true and living God. This morning we confess that you are real and that you hear our prayer, not because we are important, but because Jesus Christ has opened the way to God by his sacrificial death. We speak to you this morning because you can do wonderful things, things which we cannot. We ask your blessing and protection on these leaders who venture out into an often hostile public square in order to help their fellow man and to defend those who can't defend themselves. Thank you for each person here who is working hard to give others a better life, a life more closely aligned with your design for us. You are the true source of light, and you alone give wisdom, and from your mouth come knowledge and understanding. We ask that you let some of that you graciously let a ray of your light penetrate the darkness of our understanding. And we acknowledge that left to ourselves, we are so easily confused and misguided. I ask for courage for them to stand up for what is honorable, true, and just, despite the many evil forces at work in this world. Give them a keen understanding, a retentive memory, and the ability to grasp things correctly. We also pray for our political enemies, for the grace to truly love them, and for you to draw them to yourself in the same mercy that we depend on. You are the only great and awesome God, and we love you and serve you. May we go forth in your name, in your love, and in your power. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor Hewitt. I call to order the 77th day of the 106th Legislature first session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
I have a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections.
Thank you, sir. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
Mr. President, enrollment and review reports LB 299 is correctly engrossed. That's all that I have.
While the legislature is in session, capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LR 108, LR 109, and LR 110. Members, Senator Coltman would like us to recognize Dr. Pat Hotovy of York, Nebraska, serving as today's family physician of the day. Dr. Hotovy is with us under the north balcony. Doctor, please rise so we can welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. We'll now proceed to the first item on the agenda, Select File State Claims Bill LB 464. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Slama, I have no amendments to the bill.
Senator Slama for motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 464 be advanced to DNR for engrossing.
Members, you heard the motion to advance LB 464 to DNR for engrossing. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. LB 464 advances. Per the agenda, Select File 2019 Committee Priority Bill LB 675. Mr. Clerk.
Senator 675, I have ENR amendments first of all.
Senator Slama.
Mr. President, I move that the ENR amendments to LB 675 be adopted.
You've heard the motion to adopt the ENR amendments. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The ENR amendments are adopted.
Senator Groney would move to amend with AM 1675.
Senator Groney recognized to open on AM 1675.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is basically a catch by bill writing. I'll try to explain this simply. On February 27th, we passed LB 430 with an E clause, if you remember, which was asked by the Appropriations Committee to change the certification date of TIOSA from March 1st to June 10th, so that the adjustment to the TIOSA formula at the Education Committee would be passed, and then, which we haven't passed yet, the budget is being debated now, so we changed it to June 10th. But when 675 was written, it was written to the old law. New law became effective when 430 was passed with an E clause on March 1st with the signature of the governor. All this amendment does is adapt 675 language to existing law, which is now 430 that took place March 1st. That's all this thing does. It doesn't change anything else of what the effect of 675 is meant to do. So I would appreciate a green light on AM 1675 and advance LB 675 to final reading.
Thank you, Senator Groney. Is there any discussion of the amendment 1675? I see none. Senator Groney recognizes closing the amendment. He waives closing. Question for the body's adoption of AM 1675 to LB 675. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
37 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on the adoption of Senator Groney's amendment.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Nothing further in the bill.
Senator Slama.
Mr. President, I move that LB 675 be advanced to DNR for engrossing.
Members, you heard the motion to advance LB 675 to DNR for engrossing. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. LB 675 advances. Moving on to the agenda, General File 2019 Senate Priority Bills, LB 720. Mr. Clerk.
LB 720 is a bill by Senator Colterman and others. It's a bill for an act relating to revenue and taxation. It adopts the Imagine Nebraska Act. It changes provisions relating to sales and use tax refunds. It stops accepting applications under the Nebraska Advantage Act and provides for transfers from the Cash Reserve Fund. Introduced on January 23, referred to the Revenue Committee, advanced to General File. There are committee amendments pending, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Coltman, you recognized to open LB 720.
Good morning, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I'm here today to ask for your support for my priority bill, LB 720, the Imagine Nebraska Act. Before I talk about why I introduced this bill and made it my priority for 2019, I'd like to thank the many co-sponsors that added their names to LB 720 And for those that pulled their names off, I appreciate the dialogue that we're going to have and understand your concerns, and we'll talk about that throughout the day. When I first introduced LB 720, many of the co-sponsors didn't have an opportunity to pour over every line of the bill, but they added their names to this bill because they recognize the long success that our tax incentive programs have had here in Nebraska. And they have seen firsthand the growth in jobs, investment, and infrastructure in their districts. Whether your top issue is to reduce high property taxes for farmers and ranchers or reform school funding, I hope you recognize the fact that a thriving and growing business sector is as much a part of the solution as a fix of property taxes. We've heard a number of times that jobs and wealth are more mobile than ever before, and many businesses have the choice of where they will locate and want to grow. Our businesses are listening. They're listening loud and clear. I hope the message this legislature sends is that we value your commitment to Nebraska, and we value the jobs you're bringing to our communities border to border, all throughout this state. LB 720 is different than other economic development packages because we have actively sought the input of frontline economic development professionals to design this package that you see today. These are the people that our state depends on to represent us on recruiting visits, who participate in trade missions, who sit at the table with companies as they contemplate expansion projects and know exactly what they're looking for and when they make decisions on where to locate their jobs, investment, and their future. Incentives level the playing field, allowing Nebraska to win when it comes to project funding and location. The overall tax burden in Nebraska is too high for our citizens, and the need to grow our state has never been more important. In order to find resources to provide this tax relief, we need a competitive business climate that helps grow and strengthen Nebraska's economy with new jobs and new investment. I'm really appreciative that the Revenue Committee, we had the opportunity to hear from dozens of Nebraska companies who came in this year to testify on other bills, homegrown companies like Kiewit, Tenaska, Firespring, and from my district, a company called Clutie Steel. Each company shared with us many of the reasons that they have chosen to stay in Nebraska. And we've heard loud and clear how vital a competitive business climate and tax incentive packages have played in the growth of their companies and in their ability to retain and attract new employees. To date, the Nebraska Advantage Act and its predecessors has created over 850 business expansions, resulting in over $30 billion of capital investment in our state and 100,000 new jobs. 65% of the projects that have been incentivized or under the Nebraska Advantage Act have been new attraction or expansion projects, competing with other existing company locations out of the state of Nebraska. They had logical reasons to locate these expansions in other states, such as the proximity to their company headquarters, similar access to supply chains, or similar business environments, but they chose us. They chose the state of Nebraska. What was the deciding factor for these companies? It was our incentive programs. There is more that happens that is not and can't be measured in a fiscal note. When companies put roots in communities, exciting things happen. The private business community in Nebraska has a long and powerful track record of partnering with state and local governments to enact public-private partnerships that spur long-term economic growth. I think we need to take a minute to consider why it is critical for the legislature to be laser-focused on a legislative agenda based on competitiveness. We have a demographic challenge in our state. Nobody here is going to dispute that. But it could lead to even more challenging times ahead. Many of our metro areas have seen population growth in the last 8 years. But from 2010 to 2016, 63 of Nebraska's 93 counties experienced population loss. I want to repeat that. 63 of Nebraska's 93 counties have experienced population growth in 6 years. 6-year period of time. We hear from employers in every corner of the state that they have trouble with recruiting and retaining employees to work in their organization. I've heard some someone mentioned that the Chamber of Commerce's number 1, number 2, and number 3 biggest concern is workforce and workforce development. I couldn't agree more. But workforce isn't the only challenge Nebraska faces, and I agree that our property tax burden is too high. I hear that from my constituents as well, and I've done everything in my power to make sure that we had a good discussion on property taxes. I helped vote that bill out of committee. With the Nebraska Advantage expiring next year, the time is now to create a new program that is responsive to the 2019 economy and beyond. It is critical that we send a strong message to Nebraska that Nebraska is a great place to do business, to raise a family, and to live. In drafting this proposal, frontline economic development professionals and the Chambers of Commerce worked in collaboration with the Department of Economic Development, the Department of Revenue, the Department of Labor, and they came to a workable solution for an incentive program. This program is built not just for today, but takes us into the future. The guiding principles of this work came from both the Standard Research Institute SRI study, commissioned by DED in 2015, and the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, CREC study, conducted by the Legislature's Economic Development Task Force last fall. LB 720 follows the recommendation of these reports and targets high-skill, high-wage jobs in industries with high capital investment and focuses on high-wage jobs over the quantity of jobs. The core principles of the drafting group have been 4 things: simplicity, transparency, integrity, and competitiveness, coupled with a focus on higher wages and a change in the administration of the program from the Department of Revenue to the Department of Economic Development. We've constructed what I believe is a solid foundation for the next generation of Nebraska incentives. From day one, I have said this bill is a work in progress. I've asked for input. I've listened to my colleagues on how to make it a better bill. Based on your feedback, we've included in the committee amendment the following provisions: an even more robust annual review process where the Speaker, the Chair of Revenue, the Chair of Appropriations, the Chair of Performance Audit, the Director of DED, the Tax Commissioner will meet and review the approved credits, utilization trends, and anomalies that have occurred throughout the year. This is in addition to the annual joint report and hearing from the DED and the DOR to the Legislature each year. We've heard a lot of feedback that the original draft needed to be more accessible to rural and manufacturing, so we modified the growth and expansion category to require the creation of only 5 full-time jobs instead of 10. 1 job in rural Nebraska is equal to 1,000 jobs in Omaha, and so lowering this threshold truly makes the program accessible statewide. To address concerns about discrimination, we've added a provision that companies must acknowledge that they have no policy that violates state or federal law on discrimination issues. To ensure we are incentivizing good jobs, we have added a requirement that business acknowledge and prove they offer an ACA-compliant health insurance program to their employees. To even further target the benefits of the program, we established a multiplier incentive for the projects located in extremely blight areas, which will be added to our, if Senator Wayne's bill passes, we will have an extremely blighted area. Finally, many senators looked at LB 605, Senator Lindstrom's bill, to establish a tax credit for biochemicals, and felt it was valuable and set Nebraska up for the next generation of ethanol-type development. LB 605 has been amended into LB 720. Finally, I would like to say that I've heard some comment about pushing consideration of this bill into next year or 2020. Let me share with you why I think that's a bad idea. We have economic developers who are working projects this summer and fall and entering into negotiations with companies. They will have to explain that Nebraska Advantage sunsets next year, and there's no way to guarantee that the legislature will actually enact a new program prior to the program's expiration. How can Nebraska expect to stay in the game for these projects? Let's not push our frontline economic development professionals into those situations. As my time is short on the mic, I will use my subsequent turns at the mic to further explain the details of the program. Thank you, colleagues, and I urge you to support LB 720 and AM 1614.
Thanks, Senator Coltman. As the clerk indicated, there are amendments from the Revenue Committee. Senator Linehan, as chair of the committee, recognized to open the committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I'm going to give a brief overview of the committee amendment to LB 720, and then I'm sure Senator Coulterman, as he just mentioned, will dive into more of the specifics. We have had some discussion in the committee regarding what data will be used to determine the Nebraska 90-county average hourly wage and the Nebraska statewide hourly wage. This is to ensure that we don't have a program that won't work in greater Nebraska. The amendment clarifies that we will use the data calculated by the Federal Office of Labor Market Information. Secondly, the amendment clarifies what is a qualified business location under the Act. For example, transportation is clarified to include both rail and truck transportation, and insurance services is changed to insurance carriers. Also, the amendment adds some additional categories under qualified business locations, such as computer facilities management services, warehouse and storage. The amendment adds some additional requirements for taxpayers, such as acknowledging in the application and in the agreement that the taxpayer does not violate any state or federal law against discrimination. Taxpayers are also required to offer full-time employees insurance coverage that complies with the Affordable Care Act. They also must pay a non-refundable application fee of $5,000. Additional requirements for the state include notifying any municipality in which the project location exists of the approval of the application and the execution of agreement, and notifying municipalities within 30 days after the refund is allowed or approved. The amendment modifies one of the levels for qualification from 10 new employees and $1 million investment to 5 new employees and $1 million investment, again, to help make sure that this is all over Nebraska. There is a 1% multiplier for wage and investment credits if the project is located in an area that has been designated as extremely blighted. Credits may also be used for taxpayer-sponsored child care at the qualified location. A new committee is created to review the same data that is made available now to the Legislative Fiscal Office and the Nebraska Economic Forecasting Advisory Board regarding refunds and credits. The committee members are the Speaker of the Legislature, Chair of the Revenue Committee, Chair of Appropriations, and Chair of the Performance Audit Committee, also the Tax Commissioner, and the Director of Economic Development, which will look at the program each year. And finally, the provisions of LB 605, introduced by Senator Lindstrom, are incorporated to create the Renewable Chemical Production Tax Credit Act. This new program would provide a refundable credit if the business produced at least 1 million pounds of renewable chemicals in this state during the calendar year for which the tax credits are sought. 2, the business is physically located in this state. 3, the business organized and expanded or located in the state on or after the effective date of this act. And finally, the Department of Economic Development is authorized to approve credits for at least $3 million in calendar year 21 and 22, and $6 million for calendar year 23 and beyond. That is my overview of the amendment, and I'm sure Senator Coulterman will have additional comments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Linehan. Mr. Clerk.
All right, Mr. President. Senator, if I may, some housekeeping. Senator Coulterman, you had filed prior to the public hearing AM 1198. I think I have a note you wish to withdraw that amendment, Senator.
Yes.
Thank you. Then, Mr. President, the next amendment, I have a series of amendments to the committee amendments, is AM 1684. Senator Coulterman, I understand you would like to withdraw and offer as a substitute Senator Bowles is AM 1795.
Yes, that's correct.
Without objection, substitution is made.
Senator Bowles, AM 1795.
Senator Bowles, recognized to open your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Coulterman, for your hard work on LB 720 and for the opportunity to talk about something that's very important to me. Senator Coulterman has been very patient with me and has had several conversations with me about LB 720. And I do have some concerns. I have an amendment filed later around some of the policy provisions of our tax incentive program overall, including establishing fiscal guide rails and increasing job quality. But I do have the opportunity with AM 1795 to talk about another piece that I think could be added to 720 to improve this legislation and improve our vision for workforce development and economic growth in the future. And that is the Customized Job Training Act. One of the things that I think is pretty challenging in terms of our current set of circumstances related to economic growth is that while we need to renew our tax incentive programs, we're also in a position where lack of a skilled workforce is a top priority and one of the major barriers to growing our economy. And so the Customized Job Training Act gives us an opportunity to talk about workforce development in the context of tax incentives. The purpose of the Customized Job Training Program is to ensure that Nebraska's workforce is prepared to meet the challenges of tomorrow. It will ensure that jobs created through the Customized Job Training Program are quality jobs and support a strong Nebraska economy. It establishes parameters for the Customized Job Training Program, which is already in existence, but has never been codified in statute in terms of our expectations and in terms of the reporting so that we can prove our return on investment. So this bill establishes that jobs must be net new jobs or result in a net increase in wages per employee. It says that the jobs must be trained for that must meet or exceed the Nebraska average annual wage. And it says that the job training must be provided by a community college system or accredited post-secondary education institution or a qualified training provider if the training results in a nationally or state or locally recognized certificate, an examination or licensure, or recognized skill standards as defined by an industrial sector. Why is this so important? Why is it so important that we have a conversation about workforce development in the context of tax incentives? Well, I will pass out an article that was ran in the Omaha World Herald earlier this year, where business leaders and education leaders put it very plainly. The title of the article is "We Have a Workforce Crisis." And Brian Sloan with the Omaha Chamber referenced the crisis as a 1,000-pound gorilla in terms of our economic growth. Numerous studies have identified workforce needs as a top priority. The Chamber of Commerce identified workforce needs as a top priority. The Economic Development Task Force identified workforce shortages for workers whose skills align with economic demands as a top priority. The Nebraska Department of Economic Development commissioned a report entitled Nebraska's Next Economy, which found that there's a shortage in skilled workers with an acute shortage in science, technology, engineering, and math. In 2020, we can expect that 71% of Nebraska's jobs will require post-secondary education, but 9% of our population doesn't have a high school diploma, and only 30.6% have a bachelor's degree or higher. Colleagues, we are falling short in terms of training skilled workers, and that's one of the reasons that we are not seeing the economic growth that we would like to see. So I appreciate your consideration of AM 1795, which is the Customized Job Training Program. It was introduced as LB 527 and voted out of the Business and Labor Committee. Workforce development must be a part of our discussion around tax incentives. We must also have a conversation around putting fiscal guide rails in, establishing a high bar for the job expectations in terms of full-time job creation, minimum wages, and benefits. And we need to keep an eye on our state budget. So colleagues, I look forward to the conversation today on LB 720, workforce development, and how we can put the best possible package together for our economic growth. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Bowles. Debate is now open on LB 720, the Revenue Committee Amendment, and the Bowles Amendment to the Committee Amendment. Senator Lathrop.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. Good morning. I stand in support of 720, and maybe I should be clear. I stand in support of the idea that we need a business tax incentive program in this state. I'd like to say that these things are a dinosaur, that they've gone away, and we don't need them to compete. We do. It's a fact of life. Other states are doing this. In order to keep up and to attract business and growth in this state, it's important. It also helps us broaden our tax base. I've also heard concerns about 720. I hope today that we will have a substantive discussion about 720, the importance of business tax incentives, and then let's air the concerns people have for 720, and let's allow Senator Colderman an opportunity between general and select to work on some of those things. This is really, really important to our state. I think it's important that we have a bill that works, and that in order to do that, I think we need to have the input of all the folks on the floor today, and then afford Senator Colderman an opportunity to accommodate the concerns he hears today. And with that, I would encourage your support of the amendments, the bill, and I would yield the balance of my time to Senator Colderman.
Thanks, Senator Lathrop. Senator Colterman, 3 minutes 30.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Lathrop. I appreciate your support. We have listened. We've listened loud and clear. Tried to work with everybody that had concerns. We've listened to Senator Bowles, and this amendment that she brings, 1795, is considered a friendly amendment. We support this amendment 100%. We had this amendment already in the bill, but it had not cleared business and labor yet. So because of the procedural aspect of that, and in good faith with working with the speaker, we weren't going to bring a bill to the floor that had not come out of a committee or an amendment. So it advanced out of business and labor. We're bringing it to the floor. We think it's important. We'd like to have you support it. But moving on, and I've got a lot of things to say. I'll run out of time and I'll pick up where I left off. But for this time that I'm going to talk about, I'd like you to take out on page 2 of the program that says the Nebraska Advantage I put in front of you. There's a chart that talks about the benefit schedules. And I'd like to explain to you how LB 720 is structured. First, we're simplifying the process for the company to apply and significantly reducing the approval process and the administration by housing this program under the Department of Economic Development. While economic development will still be administered the program, the Department of Revenue will also continue to audit the program to make sure companies who have applied, who have met the statutory requirements to qualify for incentives. So we're going to be working, the lead on this will be the Department of Economic Development, because they're the frontline people that work with these new companies. But at the same time, we understand that the Department of Economic Development can't do it all. So they're partnering with Department of Revenue and also the Department of Labor. And so that makes this even better. I'd like to discuss the program outline now. So if you'd like to follow me, please go to that chart called the benefit schedule. We're getting rid of the tiers established under the Nebraska Advantage Act and replacing them with 5 different categories: growth and expansion, quality jobs, quality job investment, mega project, and modernization.
1 minute.
To qualify for the growth and expansion category, which is a first line there, a qualifying company must invest at least $1 million of capital and hire 5 new full-time jobs, and they will each earn at least $38,629. If a company meets these requirements, they will qualify for a 4% wage credit and a 4% income tax credit. And I'll wait to explain the rest on my next time on the mic. But I think it's important that we go through that and then ask questions of what you have about those. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Colterman. Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to stand in opposition to LB 720 unless some major changes are made. To me, I've been served for a time on the Economic Development Committee this last summer. We talked about a lot of options. And one of the things that constantly came up is how many of these jobs would have been created without an incentive program. And when you look at how much money we have, how much revenue we have foregone, I mean, we're talking right now, we're going to be in the area about $1.5 billion is the revenue we have given up since LB 775 was first put in place. And we keep talking about growing our way out of this problem we have of lower revenue. Historically, our revenue has been growing at 4.7%. That's a long-term revenue growth projection. So when you look at it from a very simple terms, I look at our revenue growth today, and it's closer to 3%, and yet we've spent $1.5 billion in economic development trying to grow our way out of this lower revenue that we have. It doesn't seem like it's working. We've attracted a handful of companies. We've incentivized a lot of minimum wage jobs. And in this bill, there's still incentives for full-time equivalents, which are part-time jobs, which are not going to have benefits of health insurance. When you average the wages, you're still taking wages that start below $1 million and average in the rest of them. So you can have a handful of employees making $999,000, and they're going to be averaged in to create your average wage created in these programs. This is a rewrite of the Advantage Act. We can do better. We have 60,000, 50,000 job openings in the state. We don't have people to fill them. And we're going to spend more money trying to create more jobs that we can't fill. I like the workforce development. I think that's a good thing. I think that's something we need to focus on. We need to focus on the employees. We need to focus on job training. Our unemployment is the lowest it's been in years. Supposedly we would be at full employment, you could call it. And for some reason we want to incentivize the creation of new jobs. In rural Nebraska, jobs are created 1 and 2 at a time. The majority of jobs created in the state, I think, come from small business. This still doesn't address any of those. There are numerous people in rural Nebraska that have done $1 million investments, and they'll hire 1 or 2 or 3 people. They don't qualify for any of this. Those are the ones we should be looking at helping. They're the startup companies that start in Nebraska, they're born here, and they want to stay here. If we're trying to attract companies from out of state, we don't have the revenue to buy them to come here. So look at the long-term projections. Our revenue, again, 4.7 historical growth. We've spent $1.5 billion on economic development, and today our revenue is trending closer to that 3%, 3.5%. It should be growing at 6%. Where's our return on investment? You look at the Performance Audit Committee's report. That's a glaring example. We spent more money than it brought in. And we can talk about the audit was not complete, doesn't take into account for all the other jobs created. Yes, it'll never be complete, it'll never be perfect. But if we don't do a better job of analyzing what we're doing, we'll never learn from our mistakes.
1 minute.
And there were a lot of mistakes made in the Advantage Act, and yet it continued on for years. And it wasn't doing what it was intended. And we forgave a lot of revenue, a lot of sales tax revenue, property taxes, income taxes, payroll taxes. There's still outstanding credits that are going to be used, and there's going to be 3 programs running at once. And if we think we're going to have revenue to do other programs with, or to increase provider rates or those types of things down the road, you're sadly mistaken, because we're going to keep our revenue growth at that 3% or less. And hopefully inflation won't kick in to where our costs increase for more than that. So I think there needs to be some spending caps in place. There need to be more, it needs to be full-time jobs instead of full-time equivalent. And the averages where they use the $1 million payroll for part of the average should be moved lower.
It's time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Friesen. Senator Coltman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to talk to the issues that Senator Friesen just brought up. If you look in the packet of information I gave you, there's also on the last page of what's called the Imagine Nebraska. Let's meet this head on about full-time equivalents and full-time jobs. The Department of Economic Development has made it very clear when you look at this chart before we go farther in that these are, it says full-time equivalents, but in their in their application, they're looking at that as full-time jobs. The full-time equivalent issue is addressed very clearly on the why does LB 720 allow pooling of FTEs. It makes it very clear that, number one, they have to have 5 new jobs as a minimum, and we're going to have an amendment here shortly from Speaker Scheer that's going to address some of Senator Friesen's issues about the local smaller towns. And then the other thing is as we follow through, there's 5, 20, 30, and 250 employee types of jobs. So there's 4 categories where full-time jobs are going to be taking place. As far as the dollars that have been spent, Director Rippey has done some research on that, and you should have a letter in there in your packet talking about that. And if you go to page 6 of 9 on or Director Rippey's, you'll see some different graphs about what has happened in the state of Nebraska. Or 5 of 9 really deals with the variability in general funds and the incentives. So if you look at page 5 of 9, you're going to see that from 1989 to 2018, towards the bottom of the page, you're going to see that we spent pretty minimal amounts of money, pretty much so less than 3% of our annual budget. But you also see the general fund net receipts that have come in those years, and we happen to believe that some of that was because of the jobs that have been created. We're going to talk about fiscal audit, legislative audit. They're going to ask some questions, and I think we'll get to the issues, some of the issues that have been concerns under 775 and the Advantage Act. But I just have to disagree with what Senator Friesen has said. It has worked. I'm going to move on, though, now and talk about the second item there, the 20 new. So to qualify for quality jobs, that second category, a company has to hire 20 new employees with an approximate salary of $44,824 for each new employee. We've raised that considerably over the 775 and the Advantage Act. We listened loud and clear that we weren't creating enough high-paying jobs like it was intended to do. So if a company meets these requirements, they will qualify for a wage credit between 5 to 12%, depending on the wage of the new employees. And then the third category there, to qualify for the quality jobs investment category, a qualifying company must hire 30 new employees with an approximate salary of $44,824 for each employee. And they have to invest $5 million in our state. If a company meets these requirements, they will qualify for that wage credit of 5 to 12%, depending on the wage of the new employees, and a sales refund exemption, a 7% income tax credit, and a personal property tax exemption for agricultural processing machinery and data center equipment. And finally, when we start looking at the major projects category, a qualifying company must hire 250 new full-time equivalents with a salary of 100% of the statewide average, which is $67,236 per employee, and they've got to invest $250 million in our state. If a company meets these requirements, they're going to qualify for wage credits between 5 and 12%, depending on the wage of the new employees, and a sales tax refund exemption, a 7% income tax credit, personal property tax exemption for all personal property, and a real property tax, income tax credit refund. We're going to be taking that out, which is part of Senator Scheer's amendment. We're going to be using that savings to do some other things, which I'll let him explain when he gets to the mic. I'll wait till I talk to the modernization category when my next time comes up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Coltman. Senator Wishart.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of AM 1795, AM 1614, and the underlying bill. I ran for office first and foremost to put in place policy that grows our economy. I believe 720 is a critical part of policy decisions that we make here. in terms of growing that economy. With that, I yield my time to Senator Coulterman.
Thanks, Senator Wishart. Senator Coulterman, 4.5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your support on the amendments. And I know you've got an amendment we're going to talk about yet this morning. It's an amendment that you brought to us, and we thought it was also a nice amendment, which talks to the fact that we are listening, so I appreciate that. Under the modernization category that we have, that's the last category that you see there, this is to get large companies, qualifying companies that were willing to invest $50 million in our state and pay all their workers at a qualified location 150% of the statewide average wage. If a company meets these requirements, they will qualify for a sales tax refund exemption, personal property tax exemption for agricultural processing machinery and data center equipment. Now, a company is not going to receive any of these benefits, whether you're in any of these categories, until you reach the criteria set forth in the bill. And if a company fails to maintain these levels, like if they don't have 5 full-time employees and they don't have 20 full-time employees, during the performance period, all or a portion of the incentives will be recaptured and disallowed. This program, this is probably the most important aspect of this program. This program is a performance-based program. There will not be tax credits unless a company invests heavily in the state and maintains those investments. Finally, we're creating a discretionary revolving loan fund managed by the Department of Economic Development to accelerate benefits to high-impact projects for infrastructure and job training programs. The loan fund would then be replenished from the company's credits that they earn. We're also allowing for businesses to access these credits in the form of job training or talent recruitment funds to offset child care expenses, which enhance the incentives for higher wage jobs. These are all things that we've done to make changes to the plan. We think that this plan will do the state of Nebraska a lot of good over the next 10 years. And we're going to talk some more about where we're headed with this program and some more changes that are coming about. But I'm anxious to hear the concerns and the questions. So with that, I'll yield the rest of my time and take questions as they come up.
Thanks, Senator Coulterman. Senator Breeze, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I first of all want to thank Senator Coulterman for his hard working in putting together this package called LB 720. And it really is an improvement over what we currently have. It should do a better job of fulfilling the goals of any program like this, and that is incentivizing business growth and development, incentivizing employment. And as with any incentive program, the question really is whether we can be sure it's a win for the average taxpayer. In other words, does the incentive actually cause and create sufficient investment and employment to outweigh the foregone revenue? And I believe the greater transparency and accountability created by LB 720 can help ensure that this program can be a win for our state. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about LB 720 today, and I look forward to hearing the discussion. But my support of LB 720 is conditional on one thing, and that is passing substantial and significant property tax relief for hardworking Nebraskans. There's no way I'm going to support a business incentive package without first or simultaneously passing property tax relief. Several publications have applauded the business climate in Nebraska. We're already known for being a business-friendly state, but what else are we known for? We're known for having some of the highest property taxes in the country. Farm Bureau tells us we have the 3rd highest ag taxes in the country. Another publication suggests we have the 4th highest residential property taxes in the country. Property taxes are forcing red ink on our ag producers. High property taxes are forcing young couples out of the housing market. I submit to you that our over-reliance on property taxes are impeding economic growth in this state more than any lack of business incentive will ever do. And I heard that from countless constituents last summer across my district, ag producers, Main Street retailers. And yet we're talking about a business incentive package that's going to offer, upwards of $150 million a year to business growth and promotion, while a bill to address the property tax crisis in a responsible, revenue-neutral manner sits on the sidelines. I would propose that this become a package deal. Business incentives coupled with property tax relief. And for me, it's going to have to be a package deal. If we're going to pass a bill for out-of-state companies and others, we're going to have to pass a bill to yield meaningful, substantial property tax relief for hardworking Nebraska property taxpayers. I submit that property taxpayers in Nebraska need relief a whole lot worse than some of these businesses. And I'm willing to make the budget part of that deal. You know, otherwise we could be for a slugfest yet on it. We could revisit university funding. We could revisit provider rates. You know, last night demonstrated the nature of that and where that could go. So we've got LB 289, we've got LB 720, maybe a couple others, and possibly the budget. And I think we need to be thinking in terms of a package. And are these bills perfect? No. Can we all find things in these bills that we don't like? Yes, certainly. But sometimes to do what's right for our state, accomplish what needs to be done, sometimes you just have to hold your nose. Based on the debate last week, adjustments have been made to LB 289, which can address some of the concerns brought forth. And I'm sure some suggestions for improvement to LB 720 are going to be brought forth today, and I'm certain Senator Colderman will be amenable to some of those changes. And the budget, it's always fluid. And we have to remember, we're not married to any of this. You know, we can pass it, and we can always come back and tweak, amend, alter anything going forward. And that's a great option to always have.
1 minute.
So, thank you, Mr. President. So for me, my support of 720 and possibly the budget itself hinges on meaningful, substantial property tax relief. And again, I'd like to thank Senator Colderman for his leadership on this issue. And I don't want to make today's debate about property tax relief. It really needs to be about LB 720 and how it can be made better. But without property tax relief, business incentives need to stall. Nebraskans need property tax relief a whole lot worse than businesses need this incentive package. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Breezy. Senator Slama.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just to echo what Senator Breezy so eloquently said just now on the mic, I too have some heartburn about LB 720 on two fronts. First, in the fact that we have not yet solved the property tax crisis in our state. And I think that absolutely our property taxpayers need relief before our businesses do at this point. The crisis is much more acute for our property taxpayers than it is for our businesses. Also, as a fiscal conservative, I have to echo what Senator Lathrop said. I wish we didn't have to pass an incentives program like this. As a fiscal conservative, I think dumping money into programs like this is, you don't have to do it, but that's the climate we're in. It's the competitive nature across the states that every state has one of these programs, so we need to have one. And I think that Senator Colterman has done an excellent job of improving upon issues in the Nebraska Advantage Act. And I would like to yield him the rest of my time to further explain how LB 720 improves upon issues that we saw in the Nebraska Advantage Act.
Thanks, Senator Slama. Senator Coltman, 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator Slama. I appreciate that for yielding your time. Unlike LB 775 and the Nebraska Advantage Act, in this bill, we're prioritizing good-paying jobs. If you look at the benefit schedule again, you'll see that the lowest wage job that would have qualified for incentives is 100% of the 90-county average, or approximately $38,500, plus health insurance benefits. And that falls under the growth and expansion category, that first category. If a company applies for either the quality jobs category or the quality jobs investment, the qualifying minimum wage for every job created increases to the statewide average. And if a company applies for the mega project category, the qualifying minimum wage for each job is 150% of the statewide average. I want to be clear, 720 does not allow wage pooling for these categories, so a company is not able to pay one employee $500,000 and their other 19 employees $20,857. Doesn't work that way. The only category that does allow for wage pooling is the modernization category. And since we're not requiring new jobs to be created, we're allowing the total wage at a qualified location to equal 150% of the statewide average. So in calculating the minimum qualifying wage for new jobs created, we're not allowing companies to include a benefit package or health insurance to boost the wage number. Under AM 1614, we're requiring that each qualifying job under Imagine be offered health insurance as well as thus increasing the total compensation provided to each new qualifying employee. I want to state that again. All qualifying jobs under this program will be offered health insurance. And typically, in my experience, having sold health insurance to groups over the years, groups have to pay a minimum of 50% of the individual. Most of the companies that we're seeing that are coming to our state are paying a very high percentage of the benefits under their company plans, in addition to the wages that they're creating. So that doesn't concern me, and the Department of Economic Development says they can't remember the last time a company came and didn't offer full-time jobs and employee benefit package that was very commendable. So with that, I would try to entertain any more questions that come my way. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coltman. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. And I rise certainly in support of Senator Bull's Workforce Development Amendment 1795, the committee amendment, and the underlying Bill 720. We are the body that is in charge of policy making for the state. We continue some policies, we update policies, and we make things better for the environment that we live in. And it is absolutely imperative that in that process we grow our state, and to grow our state we have to be open for business. One of the concerns that I have right now is what the sunset, the potential sunset, is out there that we are looking at. If there's anything that businesses want, it is certainty, knowing what their future is. You can't make decisions when you don't know what's going to be the potential benefits or lack of benefits that are out there. And that's the situation that we clearly have placed ourselves in right now. Doing nothing this year is not an alternative in the business incentive world. Some would argue that, well, we've got another year here that we could wait because of the sunset out there. Companies already that are being recruited to our state are asking those kind of questions. This policy of offering incentives started back in 1987, as you've heard from Senator Coltman and his work on this, with LB 775, followed by Nebraska Advantage. And many times during that period, we've had the opportunity to see how well those have worked. We have a performance audit survey that we have all seen that tells a story that's only part of the story. It doesn't show all of the benefits that have been received, all the spin-off benefits for our state for the cost that we've had, and it also, in my judgment, highly overestimates the amount of credits that will end up being used. But when you look at 1987, and here we are in 2019, the business community has changed. The types of businesses that we are trying to entice to come to our state have changed. And the update of 720 puts us in line with our competitors in other states. And yes, we have high taxes, but we have to continue finding ways to grow our state. Each one of us sits here with priorities. And I've heard priorities listing from property tax to income tax to prison overcrowding to 720 to the budget. Every one of us deals with those priorities. And I would suggest to say that those priorities are mutually exclusive is disingenuous. We can accomplish more than one thing in this body, and we should accomplish more than one thing. The projection of the cost of 720 is in line with what we've already been spending in our budget on incentives. So you can certainly argue that it is not increasing any property tax burden. Making policy and looking forward is not easy. And we don't make decisions because they are easy, and we don't make them because they're popular. We make decisions because they're right. And LB 720 is right. And thinking about those of us that live outside of Lincoln and Omaha, if you look over a period of time at Nebraska Advantage, 43% of the agreements under Nebraska Advantage are outside of Lincoln and Omaha. Those are areas that benefit the rest of the state. And 26% of the projects, deal with value-added agriculture. Every one of those value-added agriculture facilities has helped agriculture in our state and helped the very people that we're trying to give relief to with property taxes. Companies like ADM, Syngenta, Pioneer, Case IH, Central Valley Ag, multiple ethanol facilities, Lindsay, Midwest Labs, Monsanto, Tyson, Cargill.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Williams. Senator Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of LB 720 and underlying amendments. And what Senator Williams ties into a little bit of what I was going to talk about with regards to my portion of the amendment, LB 605, dealing with renewable chemicals. And so we heard that bill back in January, and this is really comes down to kind of the next generation of ethanol. So we have 24 ethanol plants in the state of Nebraska. This would be the next generation of an offshoot or other businesses that can grow around those ethanol plants. And so, like Senator Williams alluded to, we have companies like ADM. One of the companies in Blair, which utilizes corn-based products to grow algae to feed omega-3s to feed an additive to salmon, is one of the companies that is a part of this. But just the specifics of the bill deals with the poundage that is produced by these companies, and so it's 7.5 cents per pound. In 2021, this is a $3 million program, which goes up to $6 million, and there is a cap for individual companies that can receive $1.5 million. So just to give you the parameters of what the LB 605 of the underlying amendment does with regards to that, there are states around us that are committing dollars to these projects as well in Minnesota and Iowa, and so this gives us a competitive edge when it comes to some of these companies growing, in particular our ag sector. And 720, what we try to do is look at companies not only in Omaha, Lincoln, but the greater part of the state. And so can companies across the state of Nebraska utilize these incentives? But turning to 720, the last couple of years I've sat on performance audit, I've sat on the Economic Development Task Force, and have gained a lot of knowledge and insight as to what we've done right and what we've done wrong. And I think 720 accomplishes a lot of things off of the changes that need to happen. In particular, some of the upfront provisions and giving companies a little bit more predictability and stability in our program. And that's really what this comes down to, is creating predictability and stability. A lot of these companies that are growing can grow anywhere. Business this day and age is very mobile. And when they start narrowing down certain states without an incentive program, Nebraska gets crossed off the list pretty quick. And so with that, with the time clicking and with the sunset next year, it is very important that we do pass this bill this year. And I've heard a lot of folks rail against and hammer on incentive programs, saying it doesn't work. I can tell you, and I've seen firsthand, that it does work with some of the companies that I've been around in Omaha. And one in particular, I won't name the name, but they started with 3 employees, started to grow 12 years ago, and this month I believe they will have hired their 450th employee in 12 years. They grow at 50% every single year, and the median age is around 27, 28. So as we talk about millennials, the out-migration, These are companies that utilize, in this case, Nebraska Advantage Act, and would utilize Imagine Nebraska, that are geared towards what we are trying to do, keep people here. And I think Senator Wayne alluded to this yesterday, that we have a net loss in the state of Nebraska. We have about 1.9 million people. Without some of the immigration in places like Schuyler, Lexington, we would be at a loss. So these are companies that, again, are very mobile. This particular company could operate anywhere in the country, really anywhere in the world, and 99% of their clients and customers are outside of Nebraska. So as we look at companies that, we're incentivizing, that are getting most of their revenue outside of the state of Nebraska, these are the companies that we want to keep and maintain, and this is what 720 does. Going back to the property tax issue, I understand that people are frustrated with that. I am too. But I don't think that you need to have one without the other. And if we're not growing our state, we're not going to have very much property tax relief. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you grow the base and you can lower the rate, and we haven't been doing that over the last couple of years, and there's a number of reasons why. But 720 is the next generation of what we need to do to make sure Nebraska is competitive. It'll be talked about a lot today that in a perfect world, will we need it? Could we structure our tax policy a little better, be more competitive with maybe a flat income and corporate tax? Yes, but we aren't there yet. And so 720 remedies a lot of the things that we need to do, and takes care of growing business, not only in the eastern part, but the western part of Nebraska. And so I urge the body to support the underlying amendments and some other amendments that will be coming, and vote green on LB 720. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Lindstrom. Senator Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Stinner, would you respond to a question or two, please?
Senator Stinner, would you yield, please?
Yes, I will.
Senator Stinner, we were just discussing this a little bit before. What are our obligations under the current incentive plans that we have in force now?
Under 775, I do not have a number on 775. That actually goes off the books, ceases in 2 years. The Nebraska Advantage Act could go up to at least 20 years out. I think the last I checked was about 800 million of liabilities that will work its way off our books in a systematic fashion.
So you're saying it could be 40 million a year?
It could be.
And then what do you see as our liability under this current bill?
Well, the hopes are that this, obviously, as the Nebraska Advantage Act ramps off and 775 ramps off, if you looked at the fiscal note, it's about $150 million that we are investing every year in the Nebraska economy through the incentive program.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that illustrates my position on this bill. I think we need some kind of an incentive plan, but we're already committed to 800 million. And this is going to add to what we owe. And this could be 150. We could have 40 million a year under the obligation under the current plan that was passed some years ago. This kind of reminds me of the bonding discussion that we, from time to time, have in Nebraska when we talk about building roads and construction. We don't want to obligate future legislatures to pay bills that are not under their control, that bonding pushes the can down the road, and then those things come back to bite you when you don't have the money, or you don't want to spend the money, or it may not be your priority to spend the money on those things if you made that decision. So I think as we move 720 forward, we need some kind of a plan, but I think we need to factor in what the previous plans are going to cost, what those obligations are, and then what we're willing to spend now. You know, when you look at 150 million a year, that's $75 per capita. Every citizen in Nebraska is spending $75 toward economic development. And then you look at the obligation on the previous incentive plan, and it's 80 million, and that's $40 per person. I think when you divide that out, I think that puts that into perspective, that we need to make sure we're getting the very most for what we're spending. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Mosier. Senator Groney.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sometime at the end of the day or the end of the session, I hope to be able to support LB 720 in some form. That's the way the game's played. If you want to grow a state, I guess, or a community. But I have some concerns about it in its present form, and I've told Senator Colderman that. I handed out a flyer to you guys which said we headlined "Property Taxpayers Pay the Way." I got to apologize to taxpayers in Nebraska. Since I was elected 5 years ago the first time, and along with the governor and a few other elected officials, on promises of getting property tax fixed, property taxes have gone up 17.25%. Individual income tax is 14.5% in those first 4 years we served. State sales tax is only 5.1%. Corporate income tax is only 2.3%. A lot of that could be attributed to the Advantage Act, I'm sure. 10 years, property tax has gone up 53.5. Individual income tax is 36.8. Sales tax is 21.2, and corporate income tax is 34.7. We are debating a bill to give more tax relief to the bottom two that hasn't grown over the last 10 years or even the last 4 years under our present governor and some of us senators who got elected back then. Why? Why aren't we addressing the property tax? LB 289 did. Are we going to get 33 votes to bring it back to address what everybody who banged on doors was told? Property taxes. They weren't told you economic incentives. They weren't told you corporate income taxes. They weren't told you individual income tax unless you knocked on the door of a very high income individual. They were told you about property taxes. But we are told this is the most critical thing we have to do. I don't dispute Senator Williams' 43% went out rural. Yeah. Somebody had 17 branches, and they listed all 17 in North Platte and Scotts Bluff, and they hired 40 people, and they all went to North Omaha in their main office. But they listed all of their branches, and then you take those branches and say, well, 43% of the projects went there. I will guarantee you not even close to 43% of the total tax abatement went out to rural Nebraska. If it's 10 or 15%, I would be amazed of the 80 or 90 million we took out last year. Follow the dollars. Numbers can be twisted. Senator Williams is absolutely right with his 43% number, but it isn't dollars. The Advantage Act has grown, not Nebraska, but Omaha and Lincoln. They've done well. They're booming, growing, their tax base is moving, they're building new homes. It's been great for them. It has not been great for rural Nebraska. We have a depopulation problem. Main streets are being boarded up. Ag's in trouble. And we won't give them even property tax relief. Oh, by the way, if somebody tells you, well, the governor gave a $60 million more to the property tax credit fund, if you take that off the property taxes in the last 4 years, it only drops at this 15.6% increase. Whippy wow. That's still the number one increase in taxes. We got a problem with property taxes, folks. Very low unemployment, workforce development. People don't want to live here. People who are self-sufficient, who have been raised to take care of themselves, worked hard to get an education. They're going to live somewhere where they don't have to pay high taxes.
1 minute.
Because they don't need the government services. Because they have personal responsibility and they take care of themselves. They don't want to live here. But agriculture is stuck here because that's where the land is. I'm getting my property tax anger voice up too high, I apologize. But quit ignoring the real problem in this state. It's property taxes. It's why the retirees that can afford to move out. You left side of the aisle people are worried about poor people. When they retire, they can't afford to move. They're stuck with the high property taxes. They're here. The wealthy move when they retire. Lower middle class people own homes. They have a dream too to own a home, and they can't afford the property taxes on them. This isn't about agriculture. This is about every property taxpayer in the state of Nebraska. LB 289 needs to come back, and we need to have a vote on it.
Thank you, Senator Groney. Senator Clements announces some guests today. We have with us 100 fourth graders from the Plattsmouth Elementary School in Plattsmouth, Nebraska. With the Plattsmouth fourth graders, please rise. We'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. Continuing discussion on the bill. Senator LaGrone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of 720, 1614, and 1795. I think it's very important to have a well-functioning incentives program to stay competitive with our surrounding states in terms of business climate. And I also think this bill goes a long ways towards fixing some of the problems that we've had with transparency in the Advantage Act, which I think are valid concerns. But to talk more about exactly how it fixes it and why this is a good idea, I'll yield the remainder of my time to Senator Colterman.
Thank you, Senator LaGrone. Senator Colterman, 4.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Senator LaGrone. Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Mosier, I don't know if you're still here. I do want to address your concerns about the fiscal note. We've taken a hard look at that, and the reality is 775 is scheduled to sunset in 2 years. So 775 will go away, and that'll be the end of that. And I believe that we've factored in what we think are the liabilities of that yet going forward. But if you take a look at the fiscal note, and we're not trying to hide anything in this fiscal note, you'll see that it's a pretty sizable amount. But what I want to put your attention to is on the second page of the fiscal note, it shows you the revenue and the general fund costs that are associated with it. And it goes from nothing at the early stages, $4 million next year, and it ramps itself up to $197 million over a 10-year period for the final year. But the reality is, if we average that out over a 10-year period, we're talking about approximately $106 million a year. Granted, we aren't going to have a lot of expenditures the first few years, but we do take into account the fact that we do know LB 775 and the Advantage Act is going to still be there. So even if we took the 106 the first year, 106 million, and Senator Stinner said that we're paying about $40 million a year, we believe that this will allow us to control the costs. And when Senator McAllister gets an opportunity to talk, I'm going to let him talk about an issue that he brought to us as to how we're going to control the costs associated with this program. It is substantially changed from the previous programs. We're trying to be more accountable, more fiscally responsible, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Colterman. Senator Kavanaugh, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. This is a very complicated bill, and I am interested in learning more about everyone's amendments. As it currently stands, I am not in support of this bill. I agree with Senator Groney that we need to be looking at our budget and what we're funding, and I don't think that we're in a place right now to offer this robust of tax incentives, but I would like to hear more from Senator Bowles, so I will yield her the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Bowles, 4 minutes 20.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. I want to rise and say just a couple of things because I think that this is an important discussion and dialogue, and as we work through general file, I think it gives us opportunities to see ways in which LB 720 and our strategy for tax incentives and economic growth maybe could improve. So the first thing I want to say is I hope you all still remain in support of 1795. I do think defining the customized job training program is really important and that it is part of the conversation about workforce development. But I would point out that even when we amend 1795 into LB 720, we don't currently have funding for the customized job training program. It has been a successful program in the past. to help incentivize businesses to grow, to change, to come to the state and have those last dollars to train the workforce that they need to match up the skill sets with the industries that we're incentivizing. But we haven't been able to fund that through the Appropriations Committee for several years, and it is basically spent out. So we need to not only establish best practices workforce development policy, we also need to fund it. And in addition to the customized job training program, there are significant other ideas that deserve our attention in terms of funding workforce development needs. For example, currently we only fund 36.5% of the demand for the Nebraska Opportunity Grant, which is our low-income scholarship program for students pursuing higher education. If we were to fully fund that, we would need an additional $30 million in our budget. There are a number of other great ideas out there, including Senator Stinner's H3 jobs bill, which is high demand, high skill, high wage jobs. And his bill would have added additional resources to attract and retain talent for those H3 jobs. I have a bill in the Education Committee that would have established the ACE Tech Scholarship Program, which would help young people who pursue dual credit in high school go on to community college and get those technical skills to really contribute to the economy. And so the first point I want to make is that we need to continue to have this conversation about workforce development in the context of our tax incentive programs, and we need additional resources to move the dial, and that is essential and important to growing our economy. Related, that is one of the reasons why I'm concerned about the overall cost of 720 and how that fits into our budget. Because when we're talking about economic growth, we're also talking about higher education, we're also talking about job training, we're also talking about funding things like child care assistance. And it's been some austere years on the Budget Committee over the past few years. And so a later amendment that I have, 1765, would place caps on the amount that we are funding our tax incentive programs. Why is that important? Let me give you some statistics.
1 minute.
The 2017 tax incentive report illustrates the unpredictable fiscal impact of these business incentive programs on the state budget from year to year. The total estimated tax reductions under 775 and Nebraska Advantage were $153 million in 2015. Colleagues, listen, up to $270 million in 2016, and then fell back to $162 million in 2017. And those projections include only general fund impacts and don't consider property tax exemptions or the loss of local option sales tax. That volatility in our funding streams is difficult to manage and can put pressure on other important priorities in the budget. Colleagues, I agree that we need a tax incentive program. I think we should fund it. But I think just like any other aspect of our budget, we should establish a priority and a parameter for what that investment looks like and means. It can be very generous, but we need those fiscal guide rails.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bowles. Before proceeding, Senator DeBoer announces some very special guests visiting with us today. We have with us the senator's parents, John and Elaine DeBoer from Omaha, her sister, Joanna Anderson from Lincoln, and two nieces and a nephew, Evie, Charlotte, and Ben Anderson from Lincoln as well. Would all those guests on the north balcony please rise so we can welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. Further debate, Senator Urban.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Good morning. Been in the queue a while, so I've gathered a few thoughts. As I reviewed 527, which is Senator Bowles' 1795 amendment, I see that the fiscal note attached with that was somewhere around $1.6 million, and she was going to take that money out of the unemployment insurance fund. Have no clue, because it's amendment into 720, where that money is going to come from now. I don't understand why that bill didn't come to the floor, but there was some reasons I would suppose. I'm not in favor of tax incentives. We heard a couple days ago, LB 670, which was Senator Linehan's scholarship program. And every administrator that was told to whined about the $10 million that we were going to take out of public education. And when you ask them, well, I would assume then you're opposed to LB 720, which could take $200 million, and you surely have to be opposed to the Nebraska Advantage Act that has already taken $750 million and could get to $1.2 billion. You're opposed to those two, right? And the answer is, I've never heard of those. So we're a little disingenuous here when we talk about 10 million, but we're okay with 1,500 million. If you've looked at the audit report, it is very revealing what the Nebraska Advantage Act has done. And I bring your attention to the fact what it said about the cost of the jobs that they've created. The cost is between $7,440 and $208,500 for every job. We continue to treat the symptom. We never want to treat the cause. And the cause, or the reason we need incentives, is our taxes are too high. So we pick and choose winners and losers. And we give incentives to certain groups or certain organizations or companies to come here because we want to grow the state. Now, if we want to grow the state so we get more people paying more tax dollars so we can spend more, that's the wrong reason. We do a really poor job of taking care of the 1.9 million we already have. We tax them to death, but we don't talk about that. But we're going to figure out a way to give incentives to companies to come here, and then these companies come, and then they go. And we did this Nebraska Advantage Act to keep ConAgra here, and many of you know where ConAgra is today. We do similar things. We've done some things like this back in the 80s. There was a thing called Initiative 300. And why did we do that one? Well, because we thought that Prudential was going to buy a big chunk of ag land out by North Platte, and so we put Initiative 300 in place to prevent corporations from owning ag land. Guess what? That's the InCorp land now. So we did 300. It was unconstitutional. We finally got rid of it.
1 minute.
So we incentivize people to do certain things because we think it's going to be beneficial. And if you read the report on the Nebraska Advantage Act, and you can honestly sit here or stand here and say 720 is going to be a good idea because it is similar to the Nebraska Advantage Act, and what it is the Nebraska Advantage Act 2.0. That's what it is. So go ahead and give away some more tax dollars, some more incentives, and continue to do that. Do not concentrate on the problem. The problem is our taxes are too high. How do you fix that? You cut spending. Okay? So we tried that yesterday, or we talked about it yesterday. There was no discussion about cutting spending. We couldn't even get past one amendment. So I'm not in favor of this Advantage Act, or this Imagine Act, or whatever you call it.
That's time, Senator.
Because it's tax incentive. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Urban. Senator Morfeld.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill is having a funny way of bringing some of us together in different ways. I agree with Senator Erdman in that I'm opposed to LB 720, but on much different grounds. First, I have been, I think, a friend of the business community for quite some time, my 5 years here. And I guess I still consider myself a friend of the business community. That being said, I'm a little bit frustrated, and after 5 years in the legislature, I'm particularly changing my tune in which bills I support when I am not supported and I don't see my colleagues supported for direct economic development programs that go directly to individuals. Some of those programs that I've seen the business community actively oppose in the past is paid family leave. I've seen them oppose minimum wage. pay equity measures that would make sure that women receive the same type of wages that their male counterparts receive. I've seen them stay silent on Medicaid expansion, literally a $2 billion economic development proposal that they said nothing on, and in many cases, being as the leader of one of those campaigns for that initiative, I saw them working quietly behind the scenes against. Also, progressive tax reforms that would bring in more revenue to be able to fund these types of tax incentive programs. The list goes on, and I won't belabor the point. The point is that in order to get my support, and I know some of my other colleagues' support in the future, I want to see proactive movement from the business community, proactive support, not just neutrality, on incentives and economic development for individual Nebraskans, not just businesses. It's hard to really begin with some of my concerns in this. I think that AM 1795 is a good amendment. I will vote for it, even though I will not be voting for cloture on this bill when it comes to that point. I'll also support Senator Wishart's amendment, which I think she'll be bringing up down the road here or on select file. But a few things come to mind in terms of concerns with this bill. First and foremost for me, the minimum incentivized wage in LB 720, as far as I can tell, is $41,000, which is below the median household income of $56,675. A family of four earning $41,000 would qualify for reduced lunch and SCHIP. So we are incentivizing jobs that essentially would require government assistance on the back end. And I'm all about government assistance program, whether it's for farmers with crop subsidies, or whether it's SCHIP or Medicaid expansion or subsidies for health care. I'm in support of those programs. But what concerns me is I don't see the business community coming out in active support of those programs. They don't come out in active support of those programs, but then they want us to support their government assistance programs for businesses. For businesses that could very well be paying a wage that, quite frankly, would require government assistance on the back end for those people that ends meet. That's just one concern that I have with this legislation. There's many other concerns, but my overriding concern as a person that considers themselves a progressive, as a person that considers themselves someone that supports a robust business community, but also robust jobs for individuals. We all too often overlook that. There are basic protections that we can provide for individuals and ensure that they have a high quality of life, and that generally requires government pushing people along to do that. Because we've seen what deregulation and the erosion of laws that protect workers has done over the last 20 to 30 years. It has led to staggering income inequality, and unfortunately, the market has not corrected itself, and in the past has shown that it will not correct itself unless there is some intervention.
1 minute.
I expect our business community to start being proactive on ensuring that individual workers have all the supports that they need, all of the protections that they need. I will not support business incentive programs until I start seeing that, which is why, yes, I will vote for amendments to make this bill better, but no, I will not support the underlying bill or cloture on this bill until I start seeing that in the future. I'm going to start talking about it more. I'm going to start pointing it out more, and I'm going to start talking and rallying my colleagues around getting the business community to support these types of individual worker incentives and protections that should be in place in the first place. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Marfeld. Senator McAllister.
Good morning, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I've served on the Revenue Committee now. I was a part of the Economic Development Task Force and also a part of the 720 development team. So I'm happy to talk about this bill, which I certainly recommend to you. I need to also thank Senator Mark Kolderman for the great job he's done on this bill. He's been amenable to many changes, and I think you've seen evidence of that this morning. I think we all know that we need some kind of incentive program in Nebraska. There is an arms race, an economic arms race, an incentive arms race that occurs among states. So we actually need a program in order to compete, and it has to be a program that that is a good program, and I think we're on the way with 720 of doing that. I think one thing you also need to recognize is that the budget process that we employ in Nebraska doesn't recognize the new jobs that these programs bring in. You know, we do see the fiscal impact when we look at the bill through the fiscal note. However, a dynamic process would also show you the new jobs and the investment that come into the state from these programs, and we don't really recognize that as well as we should. My contribution to this bill was a control mechanism that we are amending into the bill. It's a situation where the chair of appropriations, revenue, and the performance audit, and the speaker, along with the DED director and the revenue director, come together primarily in July, and they review those awards that have been made. They also see what's in the pipeline, and they can either dial up or dial back with recommendations to the legislature the following January. So we do have a control mechanism in there to control the budget expense that comes to play through this bill. Lastly, we need to recognize that there's good transparency and accountability with 720, a big improvement over the previous programs. So I'm happy to report that that's part of this bill. With that, I would yield the balance of my time to Senator Colterman.
Thank you, Senator McAllister. Senator Colterman, 2 minutes 15.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that, those kind words, Senator. I'd like to respond a little bit to Senator Moorfield's concerns, and I agree with him. We patterned this program so that we would take care and we wouldn't have people in the lower salary ranges in the program qualifying for Medicaid or any programs like that. So, you know, $42,000 a year is pretty much the starting job unless you get into one of that first category. Then we're looking at $38,500. And then in addition to that, they're putting the health insurance in there. Now, how much will they pay for? We're not sure on that. But as I said earlier, most of the companies are paying a high percentage of that are coming into our state. The other thing that I think we need to be aware of in today's environment, and you can't say this in all certainty, but I would tell you that if you think about most of the households that we have today, we do have some dual incomes. Now, I know that there are single parents that are raising their children. I understand that. $42,000 maybe isn't enough with benefits. But we have to start somewhere. And if we take a look at where we've been, this is a substantial increase in what we're trying to accomplish. Did you say that?
1 minute.
Oh, thank you, sir. So I feel like we're making every attempt that we can to get good paying jobs under this program, raise up that lower income situation. And then some of the amendments that are still coming, and I'm open to those. I asked if we could call the question because I'd like to vote on Senator Bowles' amendment and then get some of the more amendments on. But I think we need to talk about this some more. But at the same time, we are open to a lot of ideas, and there's some amendments that are coming that we've been working with. Senator Wishart's got a really good amendment. Senator Scheer's got a good amendment, and those all came as a result of listening. So with that, I appreciate the time that was lended to me, and I'll talk a little bit more when my next time comes up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Colterman. Senator Bowles.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really appreciate the dialogue on this important issue this morning. The way I see it is this is a once-in-a-decade opportunity for us to think about how we're growing our state's economy. And I know it's been said before, but I appreciate Senator Colterman's work on this heavy lift. And because it is a once-in-a-decade kind of opportunity, I want to make it the best it can possibly be for our state. And so there are a couple of things that I want to talk about in terms of making it the best that it can be. The first thing I want to talk about, and I don't think Senator Erdman is, oh, there's Senator Erdman. Senator Erdman, I wanted to address your question. You're correct, LB 527 is introduced, had a fiscal note. LB 527 as voted out of the Business and Labor Committee and as proposed in 1795 is only establishing language It would only establish the criteria for the customized job training program. There's not a funding stream right now, and I think that's one of the flaws with the conversation that we're having with this tax incentive program, is because we don't have resources right now dedicated to workforce development. We can identify and establish best practices, and I think that's smart and important, but we also need to put the resources behind it to make workforce development not just a problem, but an opportunity and a reality for our people. So I wanted to address Senator Erdman's concern. There is not a fiscal impact with AM 1795 as introduced, but that's a challenge to overcome. The second thing I wanted to address is related to two opportunities that I see to make this legislation even better. And one of the things that I think is a good step forward is what Senator McAllister just referenced. And if he wouldn't mind yielding to a couple questions, that'd be great as he makes his way over. I do think that having a review of the tax incentive projects could be helpful, but I want to understand better what's being proposed in the amendment, if Senator McAllister would yield.
Senator McAllister, would you yield, please?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. So I'm reviewing Section 38 of the bill, which references the board that you were talking about. I'm struggling to understand how what is introduced is that much different from the current joint Appropriations and Revenue Committee hearing we have annually. And, you know, unfortunately, the reports that are presented to us show a negative gross impact of these bills. And so, and that hasn't led to significant change for our tax incentive programs. So I'm not clear how having a different committee with a different report leads to any sort of fiscal guide rails to make sure that we're spending appropriately. Can you help me understand what's being proposed in Section 38?
We were looking for some kind of control mechanism. You're absolutely right, and I don't think that kind of effort was made under the previous programs. So this is an organized kind of thing that would occur in July of every year, and that group would make recommendations to the legislature for the following January. What they do?
What I'm not clear about is if this is structured as an entitlement program, and if you qualify, you receive those credits, how could that board put fiscal guide rails in? How could that board decline to approve anything?
Well, this group could very well recommend that we could run this process through the Appropriations Committee. They could very well recommend other changes.
Would that require statutory change to run it through the Appropriations Committee? Because as I read Section 38, there's just no teeth. There's no drawing back drawing back the incentives as contemplated if it's too much in any given fiscal year. Am I misunderstanding?
No, it would require legislation to do that, but it also could enact some kind of floating caps or flexible caps that would perhaps intensify that. But of course, we're not exactly sure we're going to see a need to do that. Okay. But this group could either dial up or dial back some of the entitlements.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think maybe that's an area where we could continue to dialogue. The other amendment that I have filed would establish caps so that we do have some parameters, but would, as you say, dial up or dial back given the projects in any given year. So the amendment as contemplated would allow unused credits in any given year to roll over to the next year to be used in the future, or would allow a committee to approve additional caps if the project were deemed exceptional or important. And so maybe that's something we can keep talking about. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator
Bowles and Senator McAllister. Senator Bosman.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, Nebraska. Good morning, colleagues. I stand in opposition to LB 720 and the amendments. There are several reasons I do, and hopefully over time these things can be worked out so we can get a good bill out and get something along this line productive and useful for the state of Nebraska. One thing I think we need to talk about this morning, which many of you may or may not have went out to the Nebraska Advantage website to look at what's actually out there on the books right now. So from 2000 to 2019 applications, these are the applications. This is a report dated March 31, 2019. There is 19 billion with a B, $872 million of application out there. That's to 44,526 companies. If they pay out at 4.33%, is where I've seen where some of them have paid out at, our payout, if these are approved in some sort, now they're an application, doesn't mean it's going to be paid, is $860,460,000. That would be due at time of their approval of their application of what has been applied for according to the rules of Nebraska Advantage. So right now we're over $19 billion in application, and of that we could owe $860 million, $900 million is what the state could have to pay out to reach these. Now, let's talk about a couple of these. I have an article I want to read too. I may have time to get through it, may not. Let's talk about a couple of these as I go through. There's a lot of FTEs here. There are zero jobs created by this, none. Let's talk about one, UP, Union Pacific, $1 billion, zero FTE reported, zero on their application, no jobs. I heard that UP is looking to potentially lay off people, move people, give bonuses to their senior management. That's something I think we need to take a look at. Burlington Northern, $1.9 billion. They're laying off people also here in Lincoln, or they're going to. That's what the talk is. $1.9 billion, again, that we're giving to an area. Cabela's, we all know what happened to Cabela's, $17.7 million. ConAgra, we already talked about ConAgra. ConAgra, $45.6 million. So part of what you do is you go through here. There are some really good ones. As I flip through this list here again, I've got it, and it's easy. Just look up Nebraska Advantage Act online. You can pull up the March report. I mean, there's some very good ones I see in here that we've done, companies that have applied and done a really good job, I think, for what their application proposes and the jobs that they create. Let's take Nucor Corporation. $17.3 million is the application. They're going to create 322 jobs. That's great. That is good. You know, that's what we need to have happening in the state. Another one, let me look here. Here's another one, Kawasaki Manufacturing, $32 million, and they're creating 300 jobs. That's great. 300 jobs or $32 million. That's their application. So that's a good deal. So let's see what else we have in here. First State Holding Company and subsidiaries, $3 million for 30 jobs. First York Band Corp., $3 million for 30 jobs. Those are good applications, I think. If they actually create those jobs for that, that's a good opportunity for the state to grow. ConAgra is 350 jobs.
1 minute, Senator.
Thank you. For $17.7 million that's gone. Cabela's was 300 jobs. BNSF already talked about was $1.9 billion for 325 jobs. Alltel, $34 million, zero FTEs. When I get back on the mic again, I'll kind of go through these that on the FTEs on the applications that are zero. We'll add up that amount on there. And those are the things that are my concern with the bill as it is, that we make sure these things don't happen again, and we're looking at those, and we're making sure the applications are good, companies are sound, they're going to be here. The other thing we'll talk about on my next time on the mic is the governing magazine. If you get the governing magazine, it's an orange thing. If you go on page 20 and 21, the title is Behind the Numbers. It's on the Observer, Taxing Incentives. Tax breaks may or may not create jobs, but do they help states' overall fiscal health?
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Bossman. Items on the record, please.
Mr. President, enrollment in review reports 464 as correctly engrossed. Amendment to 583 by Senator Bostman, notice of hearing from Transportation Committee. Mr. President, I have a priority motion. Senator Erdman would move to bracket LB 720 until June 6.
Senator Erdman, you're recognized to open your bracket motion.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Appreciate that. Senator Chambers has taught some of us a few things. I was so far down, I would have never got to speak again. Senator Bossman, I don't know if you realize this, but the information you were sharing was the facts. And that's a dangerous thing in this body, is to share the facts, because they don't normally have any influence on anybody. But I do appreciate what you said. Senator Bowles, I would like to ask you a question if you'd yield.
Senator Bowles, yield, please.
And do the YRTC.
Yes, I'll yield.
Senator Bowles, 1795, you said, has no funding. It's just going to start the program. Is that correct?
It would establish the criteria for the customized job training program.
Okay. So next year, if it comes to the Appropriations Committee for funding, if you get 5 hands, would it then be funded?
No, not until the budget passes through the body.
Let me re-ask that. If next year you bring it to the Appropriations Committee and you get 5 hands in the committee and it is included in the budget and the budget passes, would it then be funded?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for answering. So we're into the second day. We're in the second day of the school of how to slip things in by Senator Bowles. We're in the second day. This is how you do it. This is how you do it, guys. You slip it in there, don't fund it, and then you wait until the revenue becomes available or whatever you need to do to take it out of some cash fund or however you're going to do it. And if you're on the Appropriations Committee, you can slip that in there, and it works really good. Senator Bosselman pointed out to you many of the fallacies with the Nebraska Advantage Act. And as I looked through the report, I was glancing through and there was a pie chart that talked about the amount of earned income tax credits that have been used and those that were obligated in the future. And it's found on page 14 of the report. And it says tax credits earned, 905 million. Tax credits used, 415 million. So that leaves earned, now listen, earned, but not used, 490 million. That's an obligation into the future. They've earned them, but they haven't used them. So when you say the Nebraska Advantage Act is going to tail off and then Imagine is going to pick up, it's going to be a long time before the Nebraska Advantage Act tails off. So if you're okay with double dipping, then vote for 720. I'm not. And we'll continue this discussion until probably 12:09 or whatever 3 hours is. But when you read through that report, some of the most disturbing parts of what was described in there was between 2008 and 2017, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use facts here, revenue to the cities was reduced because of the Nebraska Advantage Act by $36.7 million. That was a reduction in revenue to the cities, $13.76 million. And then it also said the cost range from one job from one year to the next is estimated between $5,000 and $108,000 per job. That makes a lot of sense to create a $40,000 job by spending $108,000 in tax dollars, Senator Dorn. Doesn't make any sense. Then it also goes on to say between 2008 and 17, property in 9 counties was exempted from taxation due to the Nebraska Advantage Act. The exemption was claimed by 27 projects and totaled an estimated $109.5 million. 109.5. The largest estimated impact was on Platte County, $40 million for $400,000. Sarpy County, $34 million, and Washington County, $21,300,000. It goes on to say that this property tax supports multiple political subdivisions, and the largest impact on those subdivisions was the schools. The schools lost an estimated $65.8 million in funding because of the Nebraska Advantage Act. The schools lost $65 million. So where are those schools talking about the Nebraska Advantage Act? But they're worried about Senator Linehan's bill for $10 million. No concern at all for $65 million that they've already lost in the last 8 years. The following is true. The county's lost $17.4 million, and the cities, as I said, have lost $36 million. So we continue to incentivize people to come here because, as I said earlier, our tax system is broken and we're not competitive. Not close, not even close. Our neighbors are so far ahead of us, we may not even be able to catch up. We're as far behind as I am behind on Senator Bowles on how to sneak things in. That's how far behind I am. If you vote for 720, and then you wonder why your taxes are so high, I'll give you a clue. You're going to be double dipping because you're going to have to pay for the Nebraska Advantage Act. You've already made commitments for the next 30 years on some of those. And now we're going to pick it up with Advantage 2.0. I understand that. We talk about growing Nebraska. The reason people have to be incentivized to come here and start a business is our taxes are too high. The state of Arizona, believe it or not, the state of Arizona does not even offer TIF. You wonder why? Because in Arizona, a house in Arizona that is worth $140,000, the property tax is $605. People move to Arizona when they retire, not because they like it to be 110. It's because they like to keep the money that they have in their pocket instead of paying property tax. So they move to Arizona. And I understand Arizona has a lot more people than Nebraska has. But we need to start making decisions here on how we spend our money and how we can spend less. Not how we can give more money away to incentivize people to come here who don't stay here. I said this to Senator Chambers when 720 first came up, because I know Senator Chambers was not a fan of a Nebraska Advantage Act. It passed late at night. And I said, Senator Chambers, we get an opportunity for another bite at the apple. And he smiled. And that's exactly what we get here today. So when we've done something like the Nebraska Advantage Act, and we see the results of what we've done, and then we go and try to do Nebraska Advantage Act 2.0, doesn't make any sense. Let's review what Nebraska Advantage Act actually did, what it actually did. And if in fact it did what they say it did, we should do it again. But it has not. And Senator Bostelman and I have been pointing out to you, using facts, about what the obligation is going to be going forward with the Nebraska Advantage Act. And if you're okay with doubling down on that, then you need to vote for 720.
1 minute.
Thank you, sir. And if you're not, then vote no. And let's fix our spending problem so we can fix our tax problem. Because you see, that's the only way you can lower taxes, is to cut spending. And Senator Colterman went into his dissertation yesterday. I tried to figure out what he was saying. I couldn't quite get it. The reason you make cuts is because you don't have the revenue. But we don't ever take that into consideration here. And we probably never will unless we're forced to. And we may very well in the future be forced to. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Urban. Senator Brewer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I think I'd like to start by asking a few questions to Senator Colterman. Would he yield?
Senator Colterman, yield, please.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. I'd like to start by telling you I think you've got some good things in here. My problem is I'm trying to understand both the appropriations process and the revenue process and how decisions are made. Your idea of workforce development is good and needed, but let's slow walk this for a second. We have a workforce that's already developed that is not being affected, and that's the part I'm a little bit struggling with. And let's start by some just general questions. Who's the largest employer in Nebraska?
I believe it might be the University of Nebraska. I'm not positive of that.
I would agree. You got any idea what that number is?
I don't.
Roughly 12,000.
Okay.
Do you know how many work at Ovid Air Force Base?
No, I do not.
Well, we're roughly 9,000. If we take our Guard and Reserve, throw them in there, we're at between 5,000 and 6,000. So roughly 15,000. LB 153 would simply attempt as best we can with the resources available to keep the workforce that is already here and already trained, whether it be in the aviation skills, the electronic skills, or just the personnel skills that the Offutt Air Force personnel would have, let alone the Guard and Reserve piece of this. Yet 153 never made it out of committee. Now, you sat on the Revenue Committee, correct?
Absolutely, yes, and I would tell you, Senator, I'm 100% behind LB 153 to support it.
Okay, so why did it not come out of committee?
I don't
Okay.
chair the committee.
I know the
You'll
chair.
have to ask
and
somebody else that question.
I will shift to that at a point here.
But you have my support there.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. Is there currently anything, or was there anything in the Nebraska Advantage Act that would directly support veterans and transitioning veterans to the workforce?
Well, I believe Senator Bowles's bill could be a player, or her amendment could be a player in helping that. Unfortunately, and also we had a bill that Senator Stinner had brought to education that hadn't gotten out of education yet. We had that attached to this bill originally, and originally we were going to pass it out, but since it hadn't gone through education completely and passed out, we couldn't add it to the bill. It dealt with high quality, high wage earners. So many of the people that get out of the service after 4 years, they would be eligible to go back to school and get some really good educational scholarships. But unfortunately, as a result of not having it come through education, we weren't able to attach that.
Okay.
But we are looking at those issues.
Enough picking on you. I need to shift fire. Senator Stinner, would you yield?
Senator Stinner, would you yield, please?
Yes, I will.
All right. So the governor had the LB 153 in his plan.
1 minute.
The appropriations takes a look at that and they decide what to keep and what to not keep. Is that accurate?
The LB 153 had to come out of committee, then would have been an A bill to be added to the budget on the floor.
Okay. So it has to, we have other bills that have come out, but it has to come out of committee before appropriations will consider it. Is that right?
And it will be considered by the entire legislature, and if it's worthy, we pass it and it adds to the budget.
So right now, my only option is to pull 153.
Either that or put it on some other bill or try to get it passed in some fashion. There's other avenues.
All right. I think our veterans are being neglected, and they're a huge part of the workforce that for some reason we do not want to develop. We'll take this up later. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Senator Geist.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. And I actually stand in support of LB 720 and the amendments other than the bracket amendment that we're arguing right now. And I am in support of this for several reasons. One being that being the chair of the Performance Audit Committee, I had a front row seat on looking at some of the things that were in dispute about the Advantage Act, and I do see LB 720 as being a better bill than what we have been operating under currently. And one of the things I'm especially encouraged about is Senator McAllister's oversight committee. I think that's an excellent idea, an excellent addition to this group, and basically I'm sure that you heard Senator McAllister speak to this, but what it does help is to review what is happening annually with the bill, with the money that is being dispersed or potentially being dispersed, being able to set budgets for the coming year on what the disbursements will be. And so it gives transparency, it also gives some accountability, and should tweaks need to be made to the bill, there's an avenue with that committee to do that annually. And I think that's a great addition to what we have. So, but I do have some questions. As the chair of the Performance Audit Committee, I do have some questions that I think need to be answered so that going forward with this bill, the Performance Audit Committee would have the tools it would need to fairly audit this bill annually or every 5 years, which is their charge. And so I'd ask if Senator Colterman would yield to a couple questions.
Senator Colterman, would you yield, please?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Senator Colterman. An issue has come up before the Audit Office when trying to answer questions about employment and wages for the Advantage Act, and that there was not enough information available to identify which employees were counted towards an increase in FTEs. And that issue can be solved by requiring companies to report the Social Security numbers of those individuals to the Department of Revenue. There are a couple of places in the committee amendment that could cover this, but I just wanted to be sure that we could get that information so that the audit staff could do an accurate audit. The place specifically is on page 11, and it's this partial sentence between lines 2 and 3. The taxpayer shall agree to increase employment or investment at the qualified location or locations and report wage and hour data at the qualified location or locations. And I'm wondering if you would consider putting that additional requirement within the body of this, because that is one of the needs that the performance audit would have in counting FTEs.
We sat down, Senator Crawford and I sat down specifically with Director Rippey, and he explained to us that when they have the application, they have to sign off to the fact that they will provide that information by location. It will go to the Department of Revenue, but they will also cross-reference that with the Department of Labor.
Okay.
And so we feel like that's one of the things that has enhanced this bill. We have a lot more reporting on an annual basis. So once a year, I believe it's by July 15th, any company that's made an application, and they have to start reporting their information on an annual basis, whether or not they qualify for the number of jobs or the number of investments that they've made. That information then will be utilized to evaluate where they're at, whether or not they qualify for their credits. So
Okay.
I think we've got that covered in the bill.
Okay, and specifically to location,
Yes.
currently they say within the state, and an exact address is needed so that they can judge the qualified location with an exact address and town that location may be needed in. Does that
That's
also
all in the
apply?
application process. We're going to have all that information available to us.
Okay.
We're going to be able to utilize it to the best ability. And that's what's so unique about this, because we have labor.
That's time, Senators.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Senator Geis. And others. Senator Albright.
Thank you, President Foley. Colleagues, I did sign on to LB 720 early on. I did serve on the Workforce Development Task Force this past summer, and Senator Crawford did an outstanding job directing that. I hope to hear from her today because she did put quite a bit together for us to listen to through the interim. And I do stand in support of 720, but I'm certainly going to take a hard look at every amendment that comes on this bill. I appreciate everyone being able to talk about how they feel about this. This, because it does sunset in 2020, we do need to be mindful of the businesses that may want to come here. My biggest thing when sitting through the workforce task force this summer was the fact that we have companies in our state right now that want to expand. And I want to grow Nebraska strong. We certainly want to take care of those that we currently have, and also take care of those that might very well choose to come to Nebraska. And with that said, Senator Breezy handled it very well this morning in talking about, you know, normally we come with these tax reforms that have this included in everything that Senator Linehan from the Revenue Department has proposed with the tax cuts. So we're talking about this separately today, but we also need to be very mindful of what we end up with on the revenue side of things, because if I were a company wanting to come to the state of Nebraska and looking at the property taxes and the income tax and the corporate taxes, what might work for the company might not work for their employees that want to live here. So I can certainly see that this would be something that would need to be done, because we don't want to sunset something and not have something to go with it. But we are the policy makers. We will decide what would be best for the greater good of our state. And I just would like to yield my time to Senator Coulterman. I don't believe he's had enough time to actually deliver this. And if you can talk a little bit about the sunset that will come, Senator Coulterman, with this bill, that would be important to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Albright. Senator Coulterman, you've been yielded 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Senator Albright. As far as the sunset is concerned, what our goal is to sunset the Advantage Act once this bill goes into place. And again, one of the main reasons for that is we feel it's abundantly important to stop 775 and the Advantage Act, because they are cumbersome. We don't know exactly where we're going to be from year to year. And again, that's why we're bringing this bill. There's a lot of accounting that's going into this bill on an annual basis. A lot of more information is going to be gathered. The process is going to be streamlined. So the Department of Economic Development, the Department of Revenue, and the Department of Labor are going to be working very closely, both with the Department of Economic Development to manage this bill, but also with the Appropriations and Revenue Committees once a year as a result of the committee that Senator McAllister has recommended we put in the bill. So it's going to sunset in 10 years once that takes place, Senator Albright. And so I think that this is just like any other incentive package that we've had. I hope that answers your question. I also want to talk a little bit about the issue of ConAgra came up. I want to talk about that ConAgra a little bit. Regarding them, it's true that they relocated their corporate headquarters to Chicago in 2015. But what people don't know, it's also true that they retained a significant number of employees and investment in Nebraska. And recently they announced a plan for $500 million community reinvestment in downtown Omaha. $500 million. This is coupled with a $300 million riverfront development project, and it's going to change the face of eastern Omaha for generations to come. That's $800 million that they've been involved in. In addition to that, after the enactment of 775, for 30 years, ConAgra had economic growth and expansion in Nebraska, including the creation of several spin-off companies, which have also chosen to headquarter in Nebraska. Our state would have lost those opportunities as well without the enactment of 775 in 1987. So you can say what you want about ConAgra, but they still have a large presence in Omaha. They're a good company. They've got spin-off companies as a result of that, which you see. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Coltman. Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to take a couple of seconds here, maybe more like a couple of minutes, and thank the Revenue Committee and the Revenue Committee staff. We have all the members, Senator Colterman, Senator McAllister, Senator Crawford, Senator Breezy, Senator Friesen, Senator Groney. Senator Lindstrom, excuse me. I wrote my name down twice. For all their hard work this year on this bill, on the property tax bill, and yes, to answer Senator Brewer, there is an income tax package that we have not gotten out on the floor because we can't figure out exactly the pay-fors. But they have, as a group, individually put in incredible number of hours, not just in our committee meetings and studying, but brought very well thought out ideas to the committee. So before I turn this over to Senator Colterman, I wanted to recognize how much I appreciate all their hard work. And I know that people have told me that they appreciate what we've done, but I could not have done it without the help of that committee. So with that, I will yield Senator Colterman time. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Linehan. Senator Colterman, 3.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Senator Linehan. I appreciate your support on this bill as well. I want to continue on where I started talking about ConAgra and how important they are in our state, even though they've moved their headquarters. 1,200 people, good paying jobs in Omaha, Nebraska. I mean, come on, folks, that's nothing to sneeze at. And then the question was, why doesn't the investment only category focus on people? Well, I'm going to give you what I perceive as the answer to that. In a low population, the geographically dispersed state like Nebraska, an investment-only incentive category is an important recruiting tool. Currently, Nebraska struggles to fill jobs, and so companies that are unlikely to create large numbers of new employees, but they would invest tens of millions of dollars in our state, and so that they can improve the working conditions and streamline their businesses. The investment-only category also helps support industries that often have a direct impact in lowering property taxes. Support for renewable energy production would be an example of that. Now, some people don't necessarily like that, but the reality is it does help our people where you're putting in renewable energy, the leases that are taking place there, and the byproducts that we receive from that. Also, under the Imagine Nebraska, people are not necessarily entirely out of the equation in the investment-only category. Even companies in the investment-only category have to show that their existing employees are getting an average wage that meets at least 150% of the state average wage. So investment-only, while it sounds like they're just going to dump $50 million into our state or into their business, which, by the way, isn't something to sneeze at, is a huge item. But at the same time, they do have to continue to pay good wages and create good jobs. Then I want to talk a little bit about the governing article, the study on incentives that was addressed in the magazine. I read that article and I looked at it as being positive in the state of Nebraska. Yeah, every state has a different perspective on that, but the reality is we are winning the battle when it comes to promoting our state and bringing people here. And so maybe you can say, well, they would have come anyway. I don't necessarily believe that. But how does LB 720 take into consideration the state's fiscal health? Well, I would tell you less than 3% of the state's budgets are allocated to incentives. And you're going to hear more when Senator Stinner gets his chance at the mic to address some of the fiscal concerns. But the year-to-year variability is very minimal under this plan. And if you look at the one graph that I showed you earlier, you'll see that we've kept this program very low as a part of the state budget. So I don't, even going back to when 775 started, we have not overspent our budget in this area. The incentives most associated with weaker state fiscal health across all metrics was research and development tax credits. And research and development tax tax credits are not allowed in LB 720, which that study talks about. The study also found a smaller negative fiscal effect from property tax abatements. Only one category, the mega project category, allows for real property tax abatements, and we're changing that. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Colterman. Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I handed out a study earlier this morning that talks about Timothy Bartek. He's from the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. He's perhaps the leading student of the incentives in economic development. And he's done a report that looks at economic development packages all across numerous states. He's looked at things across 33 different states. They make up about 90% of the U.S. GDP. Study includes data from 47 cities within those states. And I'm just going to jump through some of the highlights of this. That he said the biggest single type of incentives are job creation, tax credits, and property tax abatements, which account for about 70% of all tax credits. He arrived at a figure of about $45 billion, be about 1.5% of all industry value added for trading or exporting industries in the United States, and that's about 30% of what they pay in state and local taxes. Incentives given to manufacturing firms amount to more than 35% of the state and local business taxes paid by the manufacturing firms. These are numbers that you can just go through, and as you look at, we're not one of the top states in incentives, but we're very close in our incentive package. In other reports I've seen it referred to as a Cadillac state. One of the things the study concludes that there is little or no connection between the level of incentives the state forks over to businesses and its economic fortunes. Incentives do not have a large correlation with the state's current or past unemployment or income levels or with future economic growth. He notes, however, that these results are preliminary and might change in a more full-blown model that he is doing. But the conclusions are in line with a wide body of research on the wastefulness of business incentives. A 2002 study of some 350 companies that received incentives found a negative effect on their ability to create jobs. Companies that received incentives expanded more slowly than others, and overall the effect of incentives was a reduction in 10.5 jobs per establishment. In his own research published on he's got a website, found virtually no association between business incentive and any measure of economic performance, included wages, income, and unemployment. There's numerous research available, and I haven't found one yet that says that it's productive and does anything. Would Senator Wishart yield to a question?
Senator Wishart, would you, please?
Yes, I will.
Earlier, you talked about growing Lincoln and how fast Lincoln has grown, and I've asked this question before. I always ask people, I said, we've spent a lot of money on economic development, and so we're supposed to, and the governor keeps talking about growing our way out of our shortfall in revenue. So can you tell me, Lincoln is growing rapidly, not?
Yes, from my perspective, yes, and I think the numbers play out.
I think Lincoln and Omaha are probably one of the fastest growing communities in the state.
Yes.
So have any of these communities grown themselves into a lower tax policy overall? Have they lowered taxes in Lincoln and Omaha?
Well, it is my understanding that Lincoln has one of the lowest property tax rates in the state.
I didn't ask about property taxes. I'm talking about taxes, expenditures that the city has to make. My example, I guess, would be when anything grows, it costs money to grow. And I'm not criticizing Lincoln, but can you grow a city without spending money?
I think for a city like Lincoln, with the infrastructure needs we have,
1 minute.
It's important for us to invest in, especially roads.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Again, show me a community or a state who's grown their way into lowering taxes. Communities, it costs money to grow, no more than it costs a farm to grow. We spend money to grow. And I have not yet seen a community that has grown so much that it can lower its taxes. Yes, they broaden their base. They always are spending more money to develop infrastructure, to build out to those additions. I don't know if we'll ever grow our way out of our tax problem. We have to start thinking of things differently, and this won't change any of that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Dorn.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. I have stood up often, and I made the comment that I really appreciate the conversation sometimes that we have here on the floor, and this is another one of those. I think both sides are getting a real good opportunity to have a discussion on some of the important aspects of LB 720. I will compliment Senator Colderman on all the work he's done on this bill. I think he's been a real trooper hanging in there, and I always amazed at the end of the day he has a smile on his face, although sometimes I look back there today and he's frowning just as much as smiling. So, and with that, I'd like to ask Senator Colderman questions.
Senator Colderman, Gio, please.
Absolutely, for you, Senator Dorn.
He's smiling again. I guess from the Imagine Act, what are the two main focuses? I look at the two main focuses in that being job creation and growing business.
Those would be two of them. I would also say accountability. There's much greater accountability and transparency in this legislation.
Well, one of my questions then with creating jobs is, I think Senator Wishart the other day brought up the numbers that we are about 60,000 plus open jobs in the state, and we have about, if you took the full unemployment we have, that's about 35,000. So there's a number of empty jobs there already. Where creating jobs in this, how does that help solve that problem? Or what am I missing in this bill? What do we need to do? I know Senator Bolts has her workforce development one. I like that proposal in there. We already have jobs that we have open here. How does this help solve those problems?
Well, people that are looking for good paying jobs are shopping the market to find where they can get a good paying job. So if we have new companies coming that are going to create higher paying jobs than what we have currently, it gives the opportunity for those people to search out a better paying job. That's one thing that I believe this helps with. And those that are unemployed currently and are looking for an entry-level job, $42,000 is not a bad, I mean, if you take a look at some of the wages that are paid, $42,000 plus benefits is not a bad paying job. So I believe that by creating new opportunities, new jobs, we're going to take care of some of those. We're going to allow people to move up in their pay scale if they want to move or if they want to take a look at a different job. But at the same time, we're also bringing additional tax dollars to the table in the sense that they're going to pay property taxes, they're going to pay taxes on employment, and the people that they hire are going to be paying taxes and property taxes because they're going to be building new houses and moving to the state. So it's just a win-win.
Well, thank you for that part, but I do have another question for you yet. I visited with you yesterday about, I see there's about 15 amendments on this bill, so I had one proposed, but I had one proposed on a scholarship part of this, that part of their credits would be going to then a scholarship for continuing higher education. And I visited with you yesterday, decided not to even introduce it because of all the other amendments, but also partly because there were a couple bills out there and some committees on some different scholarships that I kind of patterned mine after, and I'm not sure they would have met the criteria to pass that ability to come out of there or whatever.
I appreciate that, Senator Dorn. I think one that we'd love to have on this bill is the H3 program that Senator Stinner's. We need to keep the brightest and the best students in the state. Governor Ricketts had a press conference the other day where he took a look at all the people that had got 100% on the ACT and the SAT. Is that time?
1 minute.
1 minute?
1 minute.
So I don't want to take all your time, but I believe if we can create really good paying jobs, we can keep those kids here. We need to keep those kids here.
Well, and it depends on how this bill ends up or whatever. I sure might bring that back next year. I appreciate Senator Colderman answering some of the questions, and I think that's a good part of the discussion we have. I will not support 720 because we do have enough other things in the budget and enough other things that we're appropriating in future years and property tax relief and everything else. At the current time, I'm not going to support that. I probably will maybe support Senator Boltz's workforce development bill. I think we need to continue to work to make 720 better. than it is today and continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dorn, Senator Coltman. Speaker Scheer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, just a heads up as we're getting close to the noon hour. We will run this till approximately 12:15 and then break for lunch and then return at 1:30. So just if you were thinking about it or your stomach was rumbling, that's our plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Continuing discussion, Senator Merman.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I too would like to thank Senator Colterman and the Revenue Committee for bringing this bill out and for all their hard work on it. And like Senator Dorn, I very much appreciate the conversation as a new senator. I would like to share a message that I got from a constituent in Minden. I've gotten several similar emails, and they voice concerns that are very similar to my own. I think you can hear the frustration in his email, and that also is very similar to my own. And I quote, "Dear Senator Merman, I am pro-business, but I cannot support LB 720. I can't believe the legislature would consider doing another round of business incentives without first doing something meaningful on property taxes. That is my #1 concern and a concern shared by my neighbors. I ask that you oppose LB 720 and instead work with your fellow senators to help pass substantial property tax relief this session. Colleagues, I know I have said it before on the floor, but I can't stress it enough. My constituents are struggling. They need property tax relief now. If I get another time on the mic, I might list examples of not only farmers, but other business owners and homeowners that are leaving the state only because of the outrageously burdensome property taxes. There have been comments in this discussion about how these business incentives will help grow Nebraska by creating jobs and growing businesses. How can we expect these new employees to prosper in our communities if they are burdened with paying high property taxes? Our constituents are spending too much of their hard-earned money on property taxes every year. Creating a new tax incentive program is not our #1 priority. What we need is property tax relief if we really want to grow. Property tax relief would encourage huge economic development all over our state. Our goal this session should be to pass a comprehensive plan that provides fair funding for our schools while giving substantial property tax relief. I would like to also add a little bit about what Senator Breezy mentioned earlier. We have a revenue neutral bill that would give property tax relief that would in turn be a great thing to by reducing property taxes to encourage economic development all over our state. So thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Merman. Senator Vargas.
Thank you very much, President. Oh, colleagues, this is always hard. I can't remember who said this earlier on in the beginning that they're very supportive of tax incentives. I am one of those people. Actually, really, it's Senator Linehan, I don't know where she is, but the other day we were having a conversation, and a couple people mentioned this with the tax credit for the private parochial schools. I believe that it's neither being supportive of that bill was not about being pro-public or pro-private. I think the same thing is true for this bill, that this is not voting against it or for it doesn't mean you're inherently against tax incentives or you're for tax incentives or pro-business or not. I think there's nuance. We're debating the policy, which is what we should be doing. So I do want to thank Senator Coltman. Everybody has been thanking him because he has done work on this, and individuals in the committee have done work on this, and that's is admirable. Some of the concerns I have are more to do with the realities and conditions that we face as a Nebraska legislature versus other states. I think sometimes we compare apples to apples, or we try to, but the Nebraska legislature we have term limits, we have a biennium budget, We don't incur debt. We have a balanced budget we put out. Means we are very, I think, extra constrained by the limits of what is in front of us in terms of our budget. We also know that everybody that's here will not be here when 720 or some other version of it is continually, acting out and is going to be enacted, and that's concerning, because that means that those of us having the debate here won't be able to say, this is the concern that was brought up, and now we can then review it and address it, and instead we're going to rely on institutional knowledge, which we know is lost. So that is a concern. It's something I'm hoping we can address. There's a couple of items I just want to talk through that are questions, things that I hope we can continue to work on and get some clarity. The first is a little bit about the way that why we didn't go down the route of seeking caps. And I know there was a debate, and I'm not part of the Revenue Committee, why we didn't go down that route. And part of the reason is, looking at Pew Trust's research and Open Sky and a couple of others when we're looking at tax incentives. And I'm going to read this from a report from the Pew Trust, that even the best cost estimate has a margin of error. For this reason, some states have chosen to safeguard their budgets by appropriating money for incentives in the budget, or by setting a cap on the amount that could be spent from year to year. With policies like these, tax incentives function more like regular spending programs, with lawmakers retaining control over the cost and less like open-ended commitments. When used together, reliable cost estimates and annual cost controls can help enable states to seek new jobs and new businesses while avoiding unexpected challenges when the time comes to pay the bill. So there's a question for Senator Colterman, because I'm trying to get a better understanding, if you would yield to a question.
Senator Colterman, yield, please.
Oh, there he is. So I'm prefacing the question. The question essentially is, would you be able to tell me why, based on some recommendations coming out of Pew and even some recommendations from Open Sky, and we've seen some more people saying we inherently need a need for some more controls, why we didn't seek to then go down having a cap on the amount we spend from year to year?
Well, that's a really good question. I appreciate that. My staff and I looked at Iowa's program, and we actually, since my staff comes from Iowa, they had 14 senators that we could reach out to and talk. They do have caps in Iowa. And we talked to them, and by and large, most of them said, hey, we can put a cap on it, but we raise it every year anyway. So that's why we went to McAllister idea that we can adjust up and down if we need to. We still feel like the bottom line comes back to the unicameral once a year through that committee. The other thing is the Pew Institute, I'm glad you mentioned them. They say that our program, our Nebraska program, is one of the most transparent programs in the country with our current reporting and monitoring, and we're doing more in this new bill to take that into account. Does that answer your questions?
It does. Well, it helps answer part of the question. So one, I just want to state, I still think that there's a need to, thank you very much. I'll put my light on again.
Thank you, Senator Vargas and Senator Colterman. Senator Blood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand in opposition to Senator Erdman's bracket, but in full support right now of Senator Bowles' amendment, the revenue amendment, and underlying bill. And I look forward to several other amendments that I think will make this a much better bill. I'm here to say that for over 10 years, Sarpy County cities have sought legislation that gives them the greater transparency that they need to properly budget for sales tax refunds. And Sarpy County cities have told me that they feel strongly that their concerns are finally addressed in LB 720. Now, many businesses have located in Sarpy County, due in part to the state incentive program that Nebraska currently has. And that is why the United Cities of Sarpy County, that is comprised of more than 181,000 of Nebraska's population, and includes La Vista, Papillion, Springfield, Gretna, and Bellevue, some of Nebraska's fastest growing municipalities, support this bill. And I have to say that I agree with Senator Lindstrom when he said grow the base, lower the rate. We're worried about property taxes. And to say that these are two different issues and they cannot be one issue, I think is just not correct. I think we have to look towards the future of Nebraska, and this is how we do it. I'm not sure if I agree with some of what I've just heard from Senator Vargas and Senator Coulterman, unfortunately. I think fiscal protections and caps are important issues, and again, I'll be looking towards future amendments. I want to see that the pooling issues and the insurance issue is addressed, which I know it is in Senator Matt Hansen's amendment. I think we can make this a better bill and something that we can all come together on because we can do better for Nebraska. But with that said, I want to build on what Senator Brewer said. LB 153, I want to remind everybody on this floor that for decades we have promised to do better with Nebraska's veterans and their military retirement. I am sick and tired of driving by Offutt Air Force Base and seeing all of these cars that have Iowa license plates. I'm sick and tired of going door to door and having people tell me, hey, I really like Nebraska, but I can save so much more money if I just go across the river, and the commute time is going to be the same for me to get into Offutt Air Force Base. So why wouldn't I want to do more with my retirement? We have 13,000 military retirees that bring in over $73 million in retirement here in Nebraska. And that supports 2,700 supporting jobs. The $1 billion right now that's going to be done in VA spending in Nebraska will also see a reduction, which means people will lose their jobs or have to find jobs elsewhere. But the bottom line on LB 153, and I hope we can figure out something that we can do in the next 13 days, is that it is an insult to their service and sacrifice for my freedom, for me to be able to stand up here today and talk to you while all of your backs are turned to me. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Thank you, Senator Greatgert. And Senator Crawford, everybody's turning now. I can't say thank you anymore, I'm gonna use up my time. We can do better. I had my own military exemption bill, and I was very happy to pull it back and support the governor's bill in reference to military tax exemption. It was given to Senator Brewer as his bill to carry. Senator Lowe made it his priority bill, but I feel somehow it's been lost in the shuffle and that we can do better. And before we leave this chambers this year, I want to see a solution, because we need to support our veterans before they no longer are Nebraska veterans, but move to another state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Blood. Senator Stinner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, I first want to thank Senator Coulterman for bringing this bill. He's worked very, very hard with putting this all together, with listening to the chamber, with listening to business, with listening to fellow legislators. I think he's put together a very good bill. I like AM 1614 from the Revenue Committee, and certainly Senator Bowles' amendment strengthens this bill as well. This is a head scratcher for me, why this incentive program is competing with property tax. Folks, we need about 500,000 more people. We need, to kind of get that revenue base that we need to have to supply some of the services. And that's really the struggle we have in the budgeting process of fitting all these parts and pieces together with the revenue stream that we have today. Plus, with the incentive program, it brings in people. It brings in jobs. They pay taxes. They build buildings. They build houses. That's property tax. That's property tax relief. It expands the property tax base. That's how you get property tax relief under the current system. Why do we have incentive programs? And I do want to make a correction. I said 800 million. I think I was reflecting on the applications right now that Senator Bosselman mentioned. Nebraska Advantage Act 2017 report was $484 million of unearned credits. Okay, now let's define unearned credits. Okay, let's just round it off to 500 million. And again, Nebraska Advantage Act is still ramping up. People are still coming on, but people are being paid as well. So let's just say 500 million is the right number. Only 80% of it will be paid. paid out, okay? So that's $400 million. So let's take it over a 10-year period of time, maybe a 20-year period of time on that payout. Let's take it over a 10-year period of time, that's $40 million. It's figured in the fiscal note, okay? And I'm going to reflect and turn your attention to this report that was passed out by Senator Coulterman to Chairwoman Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee. And I want to take you to page 5 of 9, if you will. And let's take a look at what we actually are doing as it relates to total revenue. Let's get a metric in this thing. How much should we as a state be spending on incenting and investing in the state of Nebraska? And under this analysis of 1%, 775, and Nebraska Advantage Act is 2%. Now, Senator Bosselman made some great comments about the current Nebraska Advantage Act. It's being replaced by 720. Why? Because there were some things in the Nebraska Advantage Act that needed to be taken out, that needed to be considered. This is a more targeted program on higher paying jobs and the right kind of businesses. So it's a big step up from where we're at today. It ramps up over a period of time, and if you look at variability and predictability, you can tell how one ramps down, one ramps up, and based on what they're putting in here, it's pretty much revenue neutral. I'm not going to stand here and say it's completely revenue neutral, but it's as close as you get. You need to have an incentive program. We need to have an incentive program that's competitive regionally and nationally. We're in an arms race, folks. That's what this is all about. We have to have a robust incentive program in order to attract and retain the businesses that we can attract and retain. Now, one thing I like about this program is it's pretty simple to follow. The last program, I had a heck of a time understanding tiers, and the application process was harder. The transparency was not there. But people did use the Nebraska Advantage Act. I mean, you can go through the mountain of businesses that have used the Nebraska Advantage Act. So incentives are used. They do work. You have to have them. You have to have the competition. The numbers do work. We're going to invest every year, hopefully $150 to $200 million in incentive programs. That's not what the fiscal note said. It's more like 140. Predictability is pretty close. I think if you look at the report, and do look at the report, look at the ramp up of revenue. General fund net receipts is ramping up. The incentive programs have stayed fairly stable. So that really gives you an idea, proportionality about what we're talking about. Sure, we can throw out numbers and numbers. 150 million sound big numbers. But that is an investment in the future of Nebraska. That's what we have to do in the state of Nebraska.
Time, Senator. That's time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, almost, all the colleagues that are here and still listening. I want to talk a little bit about following up on what Senator Stinner talked about, that incentives work. And there's a lot of debate on the dollars, a lot of debate on the jobs, but I'm here to tell you that incentives work. I have a little over 20 communities in my legislative district. Nearly half of them have used a portion or all of the tools that have been put in the economic development toolbox by this legislature and operated with the Department of Revenue, Labor, and the Department of Economic Development. But let me talk briefly about my community of Gothenburg, a community of 3,600 people, so not a large community. But when we really opened the doors to using these tools, the assessed value of our community was slightly below $40 million. Now, the assessed value of our community is in excess of $250 million. 40 million to 250 million. One of those companies, and anybody that wants to talk about property tax, one of those companies that you should know about is Frito-Lay. Pretty proud of the fact that Frito-Lay has 2 corn gathering facilities in the United States. One of those is in Champaign, Illinois, and one of those is in Gothenburg, Nebraska. That facility, which cost in excess of $20 million and has certainly been back on the tax rolls for years at this point, provides a market for food-grade edible corn and purchases about 14 million bushels of food-grade edible corn annually. We wouldn't have that if Gothenburg had not had the tools in the toolbox to recruit them, as opposed to having them go to competing states around this area. Those 14 million bushels of food-grade edible white and yellow corn, the farmers that contract with them, the 120 farmers from about a 50-mile radius around Gothenburg, get about 75-cent premium on every bushel. That's an additional $10 million each year pumped into the local economy. And as opposed to what some other senators have said, that has allowed the city of Gothenburg to lower their levy. That has allowed our school system to lower their levy over this period of time and still provide high-quality education and high-quality services to the residents of Gothenburg because of using these tools. It's imperative that we have them. I have been very supportive and continue to be supportive of property tax relief. I have agreed to help as I can on LB 289, and doing that is not mutually exclusive from supporting LB 720. That is simply disingenuous, as I said earlier, to take that position and try to hold 720 hostage to property tax. We need to grow our state. We have the opportunity to do it. That is our responsibility. Again, we do what's right. I would yield the balance of my time to Senator Coulterman.
Senator Coulterman, about 45 seconds.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I just want to correct the record. I know Senator Erdman said earlier that the municipalities probably aren't supportive of this. Well, I got news for you, Senator Erdman. Lynn Rex from the League of Municipalities is on board 100%. The League of Municipalities has voted 100% to support this bill. And so for that, that's pretty inaccurate to make a statement like that. I'm going to talk a little bit more. I think I'm up next in the queue. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the process, the attitude of what we're doing here, and the different amendments that are yet to come. But I appreciate the dialogue that we're having.
Thanks, Senator Coulterman. You are next in the queue. You may continue for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Colleagues, we've heard a lot of perspectives today on incentives and what they can do, what they can do and can't do, and whether or not they actually grow our state. I'm going to tell you, I spent the last 30 years of my career in my own community working on economic development personally. And growing my state and my county, that's been a passion of mine since I can long remember. I want to share some thoughts and personal experiences about how business and growth expansion occurs, because many of you have never sat in front of a CEO and don't understand how this works. We have a terrific group of state economic development professionals. And then locally, many of our counties and towns have local economic developers. These committed people are on the front lines bringing projects to our towns. They work with the state site selectors that companies hire to evaluate locations and incentives. We recently had this experience in Seward. There was a project called Project Superior. That's how they label them at the state of Nebraska. So project went to the state looked at communities that might have infrastructure and sites to be a good fit, and Seward's rail campus was a potential fit. So our economic development group, the city of Seward, put together a proposal for the company which went to the site selector. We didn't know who the company was. We didn't know where they were from. We knew generalities about the project, and we knew their needs, and we knew we were competing with hundreds of communities around the entire United States. And we made the first cut. That put us in a group of about 20 or so locations. The site selector then came back and asked follow-up questions. We had the right answers to those questions, so then a site selection visit was planned. The group came out to visit Seward. We got our community folks together again. We showed them the site. We showed them the town. We showcased every positive thing we can possibly think of about Seward, Nebraska. The positive things we could think of in Seward, Nebraska. We didn't focus on the negative. And after that was all over, we found out we're still in the running, competing against 4 other locations around the country. Another visit is planned. This time we asked the governor to come and help us be cheerleaders. We go through the presentation again and keep crushing the numbers with them. And through all of this, we have no idea who the company is or where they're from. That's the way it works. They're looking at other states. They're crunching numbers and looking at each incentive package that a state has to offer. And we landed that project. Turns out it was Schooler who was looking to put an innovative technology-based manufacturing facility into their mix of products. A homegrown company, state of Nebraska, Schooler. So that will be almost a $50 million investment, almost 100 good-paying jobs with benefits for my community, and also in partnership with the Lincoln area. The CEO came to town for the big announcement. We had a nice visit. He said, I love Nebraska, and I'm really glad this expansion is staying in Nebraska. But that's not what made it happen. What made it happen is Seward, Nebraska was competitive with other states when it came to the dollars and the cents, along with our incentive package. I wish it was all that easy. I wish companies would say, but we love Nebraska, and we choose to expand here and do business here without looking at the bottom line. But that's reality, colleagues. Margins are tight. Lots of states around us have a lot to offer, and we must remain competitive. I know property tax relief is the #1 priority for many of you this session. In some cases, I know it's your only priority. I hear that. I know groups and organizations who are demanding property tax relief have encouraged many of you to refrain from supporting this bill until property tax relief is passed. What are you doing with that mindset is saying,
1 minute.
We don't want to add new growth to our base. I want property tax relief as well as any of you do. You can look at my record and see that I voted for property tax relief time and time again this session. I helped vote 289 out of committee, and I'm willing to vote it through the floor. But if we don't continue to grow our base, if we don't grow our state with citizens, we're moving backwards. With that, I would like to say, I probably won't get another opportunity to talk today, but I really appreciate the dialogue that we're having. It's important that we talk about this. There are many amendments that are going to come. I can guarantee you this is coming back next week or maybe later this week. We do have the votes to bring it back to talk about this some more. If you have concerns, I have never told anybody we weren't interested in talking. We have been there all along. We've been very receptive. In fact, some of the additional amendments need to be heard.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Coltman. Senator Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. I rise in opposition to the bracket motion in support of the amendments and LB 720. And I want to commend Senator Coltman, as many have been, not only for his hard work on this bill, but for his recognition that it's important that we keep debating and refining the bill. And he said that over and over again, that it's not a finished product. He's open to discussion. I think that's a very important part of this process. And I think we've had some good debate over some of the issues today. I do think that LB 720 is an improvement over the Advantage Act. So I would disagree with those who have said it's simply Advantage Act 2.0. I think there are important improvements that have been made. And I think there's been an intentional effort to consider what we've learned from the SRI report and what we've learned from our efforts with the Economic Development Task Force to include some of those components in this bill. And some examples are, one of the issues is the importance of focusing on higher wages. That's in the bill. Another issue is the importance of focusing on workforce development. And there are a couple